Welcome back to the channel. Today we will travel through the pages of What Issei Was Born with 4 Powers Part 2. The link to the story will be in the description below. Now let's start. I can't believe that a school year passed this quickly. Is muttered under his breath, smiling in fondness as he looked at his 2 most trusted and only companions, aside from his parents. All of whom were proud of him for being the top student from all the first years, by the way. If you accept the fact that Sona tried her hardest to interact with you and you totally blew her advances, albeit professionally, then everything else was boring. Zangetsu didn't bother to hide the complaint from his voice as he spoke. Issei relented, although reluctantly, with a nod of his head. Though, Murayama and Cadis didn't make things easier for me and my nerves. He added as an afterthought. Those 2 wouldn't be able to hold a real sword, even if their life depended on it. The sword spirit spat in disgust at Issei's classmates and pupils. In a real fight, the one who uses the sword better, not the one holding it right or bitching and moaning about that fact. I know. Issei agreed, wholeheartedly. After all, he knew what holding a real sword felt like, as well as how to use it, thanks to Zangetsu and their spars. And the latter's complaints about his classmates were, completely, justifiable. Even worse, the rest of the girls from the Kendo club shared Murayama and Cadis' beliefs, despite how many times he had beaten all of them soundly. Without getting hit even a single time. That said, for some reason, Murayama and Cadis seemed to be more aggressive towards him as time went by. Weird. Especially after he had fixed a peephole from the girls' locker rooms that the perverted duo had found. With Sona being none the wiser about it. After all, said perverts were beaten black and blue from the girls once they noticed the former peeping on them. Not to mention, the 2 perverts had made it a point to express their hatred towards him and Kiba on a religiously daily basis. Not that he cared about their opinion of him, of course. But it was sad that even 2 nobodies, like Mitsuda and Motohama, wanted nothing to do with him, apart from, openly, hating his guts. Without him noticing, Issei's expression matched the sentiment of his last thought. You know, partner, Drake's booming voice broke him out of his less than pleasant thoughts. Well, it is good that you remained undetected this year, I don't think you'll be so lucky the next. The dragon said seriously. I agree with the lizard. Zangetsu interjected, ignoring the dragon's irritated grumbles as he faced his wielder. And there is, still, the problem with us knowing very little about the devils of this town. He said seriously as he leaned forward. It's like Sona and Riaz avoid talking about what they do as devils, or even themselves, on purpose. The brunette sighed in frustration, agreeing with the sword spirit. We do know that they, indeed, are the protectors of this town, despite their nature as devils. Drake reminded them in a wise tone. If you're talking about those stray bastards, or however they're called, then King here could eliminate them in less than a blink of an eye. Without talking like animated good guys and villains from a third-rate show. Zangetsu complained childishly. I know that, sword. Drake insulted him, showing his irritation with a huff of smoke through his nostrils. What I mean is that it wasn't needed of our partner to do that in the first place, thus keeping him undetected. He explained as if he was talking to a difficult child. Zangetsu clicked his tongue in annoyance, but said nothing in response. Issei was glad they stopped before things escalated. This was just a night to discuss, not fight against each other. He wanted to enjoy his day off, damn it. During the long and tense silence, the brunette's mind went to the money he had stored for his parents' surprise. If he hadn't spent 30,000 yen to the tailor for his clothes to fit him due to his growth spurt in the summer break, putting him at the average 1.75 meters tall, he would have been even more glad. As it stood, Issei had the amazing amount of 410,000 yen stored, which was by the time the last day of the school year came and he was paid the last check. That said, it was more than enough for the surprise vacation. In fact, during a search he had done that afternoon, he found what he was looking for. An amazing total fee of 350,000 yen, a luxurious suite in an all-inclusive 5-star hotel for a whole month during Japan's summer break in Hawaii. Which meant that he would spend, almost, the entirety of his allowance, with enough left to spare. The brunette was, once again, broken out of his thoughts, this time, by his sword spirit. Ice is, still, not ready to face the supernatural. Zangetsu said, suddenly, in a serious manner, without looking at anyone as he was thoughtful and had his arms crossed against his chest. Why? Issei asked, genuinely curious. His answer came from Drake. You're not ready to kill, partner. The dragon emphasized, making the boy cringe, before he continued. That is what WE meant, up until this point, for you not being ready. Yes, you're strong. Stronger than most beings out there. However, you have to be ready to dispose of your opponents in a permanent fashion, not just incapacitate them. They can come back stronger and with more tricks up their sleeve to get you out of their way, no matter how strong you are. Unfortunately for you, in this world, the saying only the strong survive he holds more truth than I care to admit. But its meaning is double. You have to be powerful, that much is obvious. However, if your mind isn't as strong as your body, then you're done for. Period. He explained, thoroughly, sounding solemn, yet firm and wise. Issei didn't know how to reply to that, despite his smarts. He knew that whatever he said to counter, it would be a feasible effort at best, like grasping at straws. Also, he knew that the dragon was right in everything the latter said just a moment ago. Lastly, none of the known heroes ever killed their enemies. Even if said heroes were portrayed in manga and anime all throughout the world. That said, his life wasn't a manga or an anime. It was a reality that, no matter how he despised the idea of killing anyone, he was bound to face it. Both dragons and Jetsu exchanged a glance that held an entire conversation as they heard their wielder sigh in resignation and saw him drop his head in his hands to hide his expression. Up until this point, they had been soft, for lack of a better word, to the boy. As it seemed, they needed to be harsh and unrelenting. Issei wouldn't have the needed mentality otherwise. Even if he tried to butt out, they had ways to persuade him. And, thankfully, the two had 2 weeks' time to make their wielder, at the very least, willing to dispose of a direct threat to himself and/or his parents. In a permanent fashion. Issei missed the predatory smirks Zangetsu and Drake wore as they eyed him like he was their dinner. That said, he didn't know why the uncontrollable shivers up and down his spine couldn't just stop. Issei woke up from his slumber with a tired groan. If he had thought before that those two were slave drivers, then, now, he supported this term with the title motherfucking and sadistic at the front. Pay for a shiver down his spine. He had imagined that Zangetsu and, mostly, Drake were ruthless by nature, but come on. Why did those two try so fucking hard to make him like themselves? Was it because of their conversation at the start of the spring break? Probably, Issei could only reason. The sword spirit and the dragon, from that night on, had been relentlessly unforgiving and deadly at their spars. And it had already been 2 weeks since then. Time, sure, flew by quickly. Issei shivered one more time as he got up from his bed and stretched. For some reason, his body was sore and he felt very satisfied once he heard pops all around it. The brunette sighed wearily, thinking about their promise that their spars would get worse as time went on. Zangetsu's creepy laugh and Drake's toothy smirk that promised death didn't help either, of course. And their negotiating methods needed work. Or did they use those specific methods just with him? The shiver he felt this time told him that he was right in his latter assumption. Those two just loved to torment him. At least, he had relented at one thing. He would, completely and utterly, eliminate a threat that could, potentially, harm his parents in order to get to himself. As he had a shower to relax his tense muscles, Issei was reminded of the fact that this day was the last day before the start of the new school year. His parents had gone on vacation to Kyoto and would return at dinner time because Goro would have to go to work the next day, like Issei himself with school. Seeing that he had woken up early, the brunette had breakfast before going back to his room to meditate until lunch. Something that he would do after said meal as well until his parents returned. Or dinner. Whichever came first. That said, it was his daily routine to meditate during the break all day long. The brunette opened his eyes, instinctively knowing it was time for lunch. He opted to eat outside for once in order to get some fresh air. Taking all his stored up money with him in his school bag, of course, he put on a red tracksuit with his black running shoes before he got out of his house. Immediately, though without showing it, he felt eyes on his person. His nostrils caught the distinct scent of a crow from somewhere behind him. The fallen angel. Drake, helpfully, supplied. Thanks, partner. Issei told him, simply, hiding the sarcasm he felt. After all, the brunette knew that scent. He had caught it on that Himejima girl that day in the student council office. Even if he hadn't seen her since then, he didn't forget her scent, or anyone else's for that matter. Coincidentally, the fallen angel following him was a female one as well. Paying no mind to his stalker, Issei got on his way to a restaurant. Preferably, one with burgers and such. On the way, though, he saw an office of a relatively known travel agency, outside of which he stopped and stared in thought. That's convenient. He muttered under his breath as he went inside. After all, it was the same agency he had found the traveling offer from on the internet. There was only one person, out of 3, working there. Probably due to being Sunday, Issei reasoned in his mind. Nonetheless, the guy working there was kind and professional, which worked in the brunette's favor. Due to the transaction not being an online one, Issei had to pay 20.000 yen more, to a total of 370.000 yen. Not that he minded, of course. It was a gift for his parents. Issei had to restrain himself from outright laughing at the worker's face when he opened his bag and paid the fee with money to spare. He did smile in satisfaction, though, once he got back outside. The sentiment didn't last long. For, as soon as he stepped out of the office, he felt his stalker's eyes on the back of his head. He started to get annoyed, but refrained from calling out to her in the middle of a crowd, no matter how many people were out of their homes at this time. His eyebrow twitched and a tick mark appeared on his forehead when he felt his stalker enter the same restaurant as him. Inconveniently, she had taken a seat to where she could see his back, with him having absolutely no chance to get a glimpse of her. While not subtle in the slightest, she was effective. Frustratingly so. Cunning little bitch. To his credit, Issei kept smiling softly as he paid for his meal and got out of the restaurant, with her hot on his heels, and walked back to his house, where he would continue his meditation. It was the start of the new school year, and Issei, for some reason, wasn't looking forward to it. It didn't have to do with the fact that his parents' reaction to the surprise gift he had given them was only slightly unexpected. His father was predictable, crying manly tears while worshipping his son's love and devotion to the family. The Kane, on the other hand, while ecstatic that she would have a vacation with her husband in an ideal location, she wanted her son to take part in said vacation as well. Thankfully, the combined power of father and son made her disregard the idea in favor of some half-assed promises from her son to have a family vacation in his third year, similar to the one the Haidu parents had in Kyoto. As for Goru, the man only had to say the words "plenty of sex" in a sentence to convince her. Issei suppressed a shiver down his spine at the memory. He had never seen his mother so hungry before. Anyway. The brunette walked towards Kuo Academy on the mostly empty sidewalk and felt his eyebrows twitching in annoyance. His stalker from the day continued her work from the day before. Again, he had no subtle way of finding out her face. Thankfully, the feeling of being followed ended the moment he got on school grounds. It seemed that the fallen angel knew her limits as to where she could follow him around. That said, he knew that she would do the same after school. More specifically, after he was finished with the kendo club. Speaking of which, he breathed a sigh of pure irritation. The girls there would try to beat him black and blue, like Mitsuda and Motohama, just to prove a point. Especially Murayama and Kadis, for reasons that he couldn't fathom. All proficient in kendo, the girls at the club seemed more willing to beat up guys like himself and the two perverts than to, actually, become better at it. Girls were weird. Plain and simple. The brunette rubbed the bridge of his nose to alleviate an oncoming headache. He had built up a lot of frustration during the break and he needed to vent somehow. The situation with his stalker didn't help matters. At all. Hopefully, the girls from the kendo club had changed their views. That, or they wouldn't pester him enough to make him reach his breaking point. He didn't want to, actually, hurt them. The brunette was on the mat of the kendo club, doing some basic katas with a shinai to clear his head, clad in his academy short-sleeved t-shirt and shorts. It didn't help much, but the alternative was way worse. Issei's nose and ears twitched, hearing footsteps coming his way. What made him stop his katas and turn to face the entrance, however, was the familiar scent he caught. I, honestly, didn't expect that. Issei muttered under his breath in surprise. The person in question opened the door and was, visibly, startled to see Issei staring at them in wonder. Especially since they were clad in the obligated gear for kendo, including a shinai of their own, minus the head mask, which they carried on their left hand. "Good morning, Haidu-kun." The person greeted him with an awkward smile and a sheepish scratch at the back of their head. An awkward silence ensued. In the meantime, Issei continued to stare at the newcomer in well-hidden incredulously as he tilted his head to the right and rested his shinai on the same shoulder. At the same time, the figure in front of him looked all the more affected by the awkwardness of the situation. Unintentionally from both sides, a thick tension had built up between them. Finally, it was the brunette who broke the silence in a tone that conveyed a query, simple statement, as well as genuine honesty and shock. "I didn't know you were a swordsman, Kiba-san." Kiba felt like a deer being caught by an apex predator. He wasn't that far in his assumption, but he didn't know that yet. In hindsight, he should have expected the brunette being in the kendo club first thing in the morning. Also, he was curious as to why said brunette didn't wear the designated gear. Was it confidence? Arrogance? Pure skill? Something else entirely? Or a weird combination of all? So Nakaichu had been right from the start. Haidu Issei was a very interesting person. Especially since he was a human. Nevertheless, Kiba was thankful that the boy before him broke the awkward silence as well as cutting the thick tension with a simple sentence. Or was he the only one feeling the tension? "I'm told that I'm very proficient in swordsmanship, Haidu-kun." The blonde boy said honestly, his kind smile returning to his face. "That's so?" Issei asked with a raised eyebrow in genuine curiosity. In Kiba's eyes, it was as if the brunette was doubting him due to the latter's facial expression. I have no reason to lie to you, Haidu-kun. He said seriously, smiling, still in place, which hid his irritation. The blonde didn't like the brunete's small smile in the slightest. Something inside him was screaming at him to get the fuck out of there. Kiba didn't listen to his gut. He did, however, listen very clearly at that, the challenge from the boy before him. Then, would you care for a spar, Kiba-san? Of course, Haidu-kun. Even as he agreed, Kiba felt a shiver run down his spine. Also, he didn't know why, but he felt compelled to not wear the head mask. He was having a blast. He knew that the both of them were holding back tremendously in order to appear as normal humans having a kendo spar, but he didn't care. He didn't even use his observation haki to avoid getting hit. Only skill. Pure and simple. He had yet to be hit by his adversary, but it was considerably more difficult to land a hit of his own while holding back. Speaking of which, he was, still, physically stronger than the blonde. What added to his continuously rising good mood was the blonde's facial expression. He disregarded the minuscule amount of fear he saw in the blonde's eyes. The latter seemed to be in awe of his skill and strength, as well as in shock and, dare he think, denial that someone like him was better in an aspect that the devil before him prided himself in. Issei hadn't noticed it, but his face had morphed in a predatory expression, complete with a toothy smirk, which showed his longer than normal canines. As for Kiba, he felt like his pride as a swordsman was shattered in a million pieces. He was losing, badly at that, to a human at the same age as himself. And, as the sadist the brunette was, he basked in the sentiments the blonde was showing through his face. The two separated from the NTH lock they had found themselves in. Kiba was breathing heavily and was sweating buckets from the exertion he had put on himself to match his opponent. He was, internally, shocked that the human before him didn't seem winded in the slightest. In fact, if anything, the brunette seemed raring to continue as if the half-an-hour spar hadn't even happened in the first place. The blonde was glad that this was just a spar and not a real sword fight. Especially one that could have been a battle of attrition. Not to mention that he had yet to land a single hit. How ridiculous was that? Let's end this spar, Kiba-kun. Issei's voice broke him out of his reverie. Despite his eagerness, Kiba could tell that Issei was sad that this spar had to end. After all, they had school to attend to. That said, the blonde suppressed a shiver down his spine at the widening of the brunette's predatory smirk. Yes, Haidu-kun. Let's finish this. Kiba agreed, hoping he didn't sound eager for his humiliation to end. Also, he took notice of the brunette changing the suffix used to address him. It was his only consolation that through his soundless defeat, he had formed a bond with his opponent. What kind of bond, he didn't know. Although, he had a feeling it was of the good kind. His hope to not sound eager died a brutal death once he noticed a smirk on the brunette's face, threatening to split his face in two. There was a beat. Then, the both of them moved. Kiba knew that his fatigue played a major factor to his delayed movement, but he could have sworn that his opponent moved out of the way from his overhead swing a little too fast for a human. That said, he felt the tap of Issei's shinai on his left shoulder, while his own shinai was pressed on the mat, a hair's breadth away from the brunette's body. It was official. Kiba had lost the spar. Or, more accurately, Issei was the one to win it. Both sentences had one thing in common, though. Issei was the only one to land hits on his opponent, making Kiba's loss seem humiliating. Despite him not showing it, the blonde felt that sentiment tenfold as he moved his eyes from the tip of his own shinai to the one being pressed on his shoulder. He needed to train. Hard. He needed to train from the bottom up all over again. His thoughts were interrupted once again when Issei removed his shinai from the blonde's shoulder. Kiba dared to look at the brunette's face and, despite not showing it, he was surprised to see a soft smile on the latter's face. Thank you, Kiba-kun. Issei said in a soft yet emotional tone that his own ears didn't seem to catch. I had a lot of fun today. He added in the same tone, albeit with sincere honesty. His loss mattered little in his mind at that moment. The apex predator that challenged him was nowhere to be seen, and it was replaced by a regular teenage boy talking to his friend. Kiba, finally, understood the bond he had created with the softly smiling brunette before him. The look in the latter's eyes was of someone regarding the other as a friend. The blonde restrained himself from widening his eyes at his mind's revelation. Said mind was, almost, incapable of comprehending that, despite his earlier humiliation, Kiba himself felt some sort of camaraderie with the brunette. Be it friendship or something else, Kiba didn't know and, honestly, cared little about. The sentiment that grew when he saw the brunette presenting his right hand, shinai passed to the other one some time between their friendly stare-off, for a shake. Kiba realized that, for the very first time since a long time ago, his kind smile was genuine as he shared a firm handshake with the brunette. Likewise, Haidu-kun. I had fun in our spar as well. The blonde found himself talking honestly. The first day of the school year came to an end. Unfortunately, however, Issei's good mood was ruined as soon as he realized that he was in the same class with Mitsuda and Motohama again. Those guys' hatred towards his existence seemed to have, marginally, grown during the break. As if that wasn't enough, Kiryuika was in his class as well. And, finally, the worst part was that Murayama and Kadis, as well as most of the kendo club altogether, had come to his class. In Issei's mind, it was, most definitely, Sona's doing. The girl didn't seem to hold a grudge against him for blowing all of her advances throughout last year, but the people he would have in his class for a whole year said otherwise for that matter. It was like Sona took her revenge on him. By the way, that wasn't the case at all. It was just a coincidence. Anyhow, the day ended without a major incident. And, thankfully, his spar with Kiba was kept a secret by both sides. At least, when it came to regular humans. The mere thought of that happening had sent a justifiable shiver down the spines of both boys. More on that at a later time. He couldn't suppress a smile at the thought of how the spar ended and the feeling he got from it, though. The last time he had a similar feeling went back to the time he played with Rin. It was like he had made a new friend after all this time. Which was the reason he couldn't stop smiling. All in all, those were Issei's thoughts of his first day in his second year as he sat cross-legged on his bed right before he closed his eyes and evened his breathing to start his meditation. By doing that, however, he put all of his concentration on his meditative state, which meant that all of his senses were dulled. Including his ears and nose. It was because of his meditation that he missed a conversation that happened at the old school building of Kuo Academy. The old school building of Kuo Academy housed the Occult Research Club. Said club was a mere front for the devils under Gremory Ria's peerage, with the red-haired devil herself being the leader. The beautiful, natural Redeed was seated behind her desk and wore a concentrated look as she filled in the necessary paperwork for tonight's contracts to be done without any issues. The kendo was right behind her and to her left, a serene, closed-eyed smile on her face as she waited for the time to perform her duties as a devil. She held a silver tray in her hands in case Rias wanted to be served some tea. Kaneko was on the couch, munching on some cookies Akeno had made just for her. None of the three girls were startled when the door opened, with Rias raising her head to greet the one who entered. After all, they were expecting the arrival of the handsome young man. What they didn't expect, however, was the blonde boy's whole demeanor. Even Kaneko stopped eating for a moment in order to observe the rare phenomenon of Kiba genuinely smiling. "Greetings, Rias Butchu, Akeno-san, Kaneko-chan." The blonde greeted them, his smile turning into a charming one, before returning to the one he had walked in with as he sat on the couch opposite the white-haired girl. Rias regained her composure with a small shake of her head before, with a soft smile of her own, she greeted him as well. "Good evening, Udo." Akeno opted to greet him, silently, with just a nod, before, without waiting for an order, she went to the club's kitchenette to prepare tea for everyone. After all, Rias had, almost, finished with her paperwork. "Did something good happen today in your class?" Rias asked him curiously as she leaned back on her chair and crossed her arms under her impressively large breasts, making them look more prominent. She either ignored or never noticed Kaneko's twitching eyebrow at the gesture. She did, however, feel a slap to her ego that the blonde was looking at the ceiling as he replied to her. "I guess you could say that," Kiba said vaguely. Feeling Rias and Kaneko's stares intensifying in curiosity, he continued. "It didn't happen during classes, though. It was even before those started." He elaborated in the same vague fashion, knowing he had their undivided attention. After all, apart from their duties as devils and their homework as students, there wasn't much they could discuss as a group. With Kaneko being the most silent out of everybody else. At that moment, Akeno returned and served her delicious tea to everyone. It was after Rias took her first sip elegantly at that she expressed her curiosity. "Well?" she probed. "Don't keep us in suspense." Kiba chuckled good-naturedly before dropping the bomb on them. "Fufufu. Very well, then. This morning, I had a spar with Haidu-kun in kendo for a half an hour or so." He could feel their surprise from a mile away, as well as their intrigue on the matter. He turned to face the Redeed as he spoke. "I lost, Rias Butchu," he revealed, softly, not surprised at her reaction. Rias was, understandably, shocked at the revelation. "How?" she inquired disbelievingly, her mouth running faster than her mind at that moment. Akeno mimicked Ria's widening of her eyes in disbelief and, almost, dropped the tray from her hands. Kaneko, for her part, stared hard at him, with her expression not showing any emotion whatsoever. She had known that Haidu was stronger than all of them combined. In fact, all of them remembered that he, basically, worked as a shishu for the kendo club. But, to defeat someone of Kiba's caliber and for the blonde to not be in the dumps for his, undoubtedly, shuddered pride, something was amiss. He didn't just beat me in the spar, fair and square. Kiba's voice broke them all from their individual thoughts, the blonde facing the ceiling, once again, with his hands crossed behind his head to act as a makeshift pillow. I couldn't land a single hit on him, no matter how much I tried. Even when the spar ended, Haidu-kun seemed ready to go for more, while I was dead on my feet. Honestly, I figured that him having a recommendation to be a kendo shishu meant he was good, but I didn't expect him to be that good. He explained with enthusiasm, knowing he had shocked the girls even more. Ria's had many questions ready to pop out from her mouth, starting with why the blonde was so happy about his loss, no humiliation, but refrained from asking, opting for the boy to finish his story. I know that I may have disappointed you, Ria's butchu, and I'm truly sorry for that. Kiba continued, apologetically, as he faced the redeed. Seeing, apart from shock, pride and compassion in her eyes, the blonde took the hint and finished his small story in a soft, fond yet firm tone. My pride and my skills as a swordsman were truly and utterly crushed and humiliated this morning. However, Haidu-kun's expression conveyed no pride in his win whatsoever. I believe, at the end of the day, we both felt a sense of camaraderie. So much so that I dare to believe that Haidu-kun and myself can become friends. Ria's found herself wearing a hopeful smile at the blonde's words, especially the last sentence. She had hoped that her blonde servant would find something else to focus on, apart from his hatred for holy swords. And it seemed that If Issei was that something. Or, rather, someone. Akeno was also smiling. Though hers was just sincere happiness for her friend and the, unlikely as it was, outcome of an unexpected encounter. As for Kaneko, her face was, still, devoid of any emotion. Internally, she was glad for her comrade. More importantly, though, she was glad that she hadn't said anything about Haidu's real power to anyone. If she had done so, Kiba would have, most probably, missed the opportunity to have an encounter with that outcome. Even better, it seemed that her first assessment of If Issei was correct. Hopefully, Kaneko thought. Yudo-senpai just found us a very strong ally whom Ria's butchu will need sooner or later. Irideed was, completely, unaware of the white-haired girl's thoughts, but she felt the urge to agree with her on something, for some reason. Ignoring the feeling as non-consequential, she thought of a way to approach Issei in a friendly manner without exposing the supernatural to him. A personal invitation from herself through Kiba would do the job, but she didn't think the Haidu boy would appreciate it very much. So, this was out. Meeting him, coincidentally, at Sona's office wouldn't do either. Last she heard from her friend and rival, Haidu kept their interactions at a minimum, despite seemingly hitting it off pretty well in the beginning. For some reason, she had felt vindictive pleasure when she had heard of this. She couldn't think of any solution to her inner struggle. That is, until she looked at the serenely smiling Kiba, who was facing the ceiling. An epiphany came to her mind and her ahogue danced in agreement. Spontaneous as it was, her idea needed to be consulted by Sona first, which was no problem at all. She knew that her friend and rival would like her idea as much as herself. Hopefully, Ria's prayed to her older brother's title as a Mayu, her idea wouldn't backfire on her and, most importantly, her servant's happiness. Udo. All heads turned to her direction as she called out to the blonde boy, with all of them taking notice of her pleasant smile. Said boy hoped it didn't spell trouble for himself. What would you say if you and Haidu-kun had another spar, tomorrow after school? It was the way her question came out, innocent as it was. And, despite him taking notice of her smile turning mischievous, along with her blue eyes, Kiba couldn't find himself capable of denying her. Again, the boy hoped that it wouldn't spell trouble for himself. Of course, Ria's butchu. Hey Haidu. Issei suppressed an annoyed sigh at the one who called him out in a surprised yet questioningly demanding manner, as he had his eyes closed and relaxed on his chair in his classroom, waiting for the math teacher to come. He didn't need to open his eyes to know that two specific people had marched, in record time, at his desk. Yet, he didn't want to deal with them while in class. That said, he didn't want to cause a scene, even if it wouldn't be his fault. For the record, it was never his fault. Without opening his eyes, the brunette addressed the speaker. What is it, Caddis? He asked what people around him, including the one he spoke to, thought in an apathetic tone. Said girl, along with her companion, became annoyed at his tone, but refrained from expressing that. She wanted to talk to him for a reason. What's this rumor we heard during lunch break that you're having a formal exhibition match in swordsmanship with Kiba-kun, after school, huh? The second girl demanded, hotly, once they reached his desk and loomed over him in an intimidating posture, complete with a glare. Issei, finally, opened his eyes to see the heated glares of Caddis and Murayama, both having their arms crossed under their breasts and their right legs tapping the floor impatiently. His own eyes showed his disbelief at what he heard. He had learned his lesson last year, so he had decided to tune out everybody during school hours, which was why it was the first time he heard about this, since he wasn't informed by the student council, Akasona, when he went to help her with paperwork during lunch break. "Hey. Don't ignore us, Haidu." At Cadis's indignant shout, he was brought out of his musings. A brief look around the classroom showed that no one else was surprised to hear about that rumor, which included the two notorious perverts known as Mitsuda and Motohama, if the rest of the girls' excited whispering was anything to go by. He didn't know what was running through the latter duo's heads, but, according to their glares, he could make a guess. Finally, his still, surprised eyes locked with Cadis's heatedly glaring ones. "I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about," Issei replied honestly. For a moment, he thought that he had given the wrong answer since the girls' glares upped in intensity. However, they, seemingly, believed him and their expression softened, so much so that they looked at him in question. "How do you not know about this?" Murayama asked in genuine curiosity. "Weren't you helping the student council during lunch break? How come Shitori Kaichu didn't tell you?" Cadis added with the same sentiment. Issei closed his eyes as he frowned and crossed his arms against his chest. It was obvious by his suddenly tense posture that he was agitated. He didn't want regular humans to see his eyes turn in reptilian slits, after all. "That's my question as well," he replied. It was the unnatural calmness of his statement that made everyone in class shiver. It was like he was ready to cause some serious pain to someone. Addis and Murayama were glad that they weren't that someone. The same went for the rest of their classmates. In another classroom, Kibayudo couldn't stop the violent shiver that ran down his spine, but managed to control his facial expression to not turn into one of horror. It seems that rumor, finally, reached Haidu-kun, he thought, grimly. It also seems that agreeing with Ria's Butchu's idea was a bad decision on my part in the first place, he added gloomily, knowing he was doomed to even more humiliation. And, this time, his gut told him that pain would be the starting dish, the main course and the dessert all in one fell swoop. The blonde sighed in resignation to his fate. After all, it was too late to back out. That said, it didn't mean he would carry all the blame for his imminent doom. Thibba suppressed a small vindictive smirk towards his master, or is it mistress? And the student council president. Even if he would be the one to take a serious beating, he would rat the two young women out, knight's honor be damned. When and where? Issei demanded calmly, breaking the heavy and awkward silence that had fallen in the classroom. After school, in the auditorium. Murayama answered him, awkwardly, with a small stutter. Neither she nor anyone else had seen him so agitated. All the girls from the kendo club, especially Cadis and Murayama, had seen him getting annoyed during his sessions with them, but not like this. A nod was all the answer he gave her. Taking the hint that the conversation was over, the two girls returned to their seats in uncomfortable silence, exchanging awkward glances along the way. Until the end of the school day, not even the teachers dared to call him out on not participating in class. Issei was just sitting on his chair in the same way when he had, first, become agitated and remained like that the rest of his classes. He was aware of the occasional awkward glances his classmates sent his way, but paid them no mind. So, when the final bell rang, all of his classmates watched in morbid trepidation as he, slowly, stood up and uncrossed his arms from his chest, with his hands falling to his sides in tightly clenched trembling fists, and his facial expression was hidden under his front hair. They got out of the classroom in record time and, despite their fear of him, they still went straight to the auditorium after they had packed up all their things in order to get a good seat for the oncoming spectacle. Issei was just one push away from his breaking point. He had accumulated a lot of frustration since Rin moved to England. All these years, despite him not showing it, he felt extremely lonely. Then, without his consent, he was burdened with the world's protection, which, in a way, made his and Rin's dream of becoming heroes true. That said, he didn't like the way it would come to fruition, but beggars could never become choosers. As if that wasn't enough, the tenants in his soul had decided, lately, to be deadly in their spars, just so they could teach him a lesson on how to kill and be fine with it. At least, it was only for supernatural affiliated beings, which, much to his displeasure, included humans with sacred gears and the like. And last, but not least, his fallen angel stalker wouldn't leave him alone, apart from his time at school and his home. And he wasn't even 17. The brunette found himself needing to vent, badly, as he walked towards the auditorium. He had tuned everything and everyone, including dragons and Jetsu, out as an attempt to calm his mind. It didn't work, but he didn't care at this point. He stopped mid-step when he realized that he needed to get his shinai for the match against the blonde, meaning that he needed to go to the kendo club first. If anyone was present and paid attention to him, they would have seen the brunette perfectly navigating himself through the school grounds with his eyes closed, even if the latter were hidden under his front strands of hair. The auditorium was packed full of the entirety of the student body and the teachers. In the front rows were the teachers, the student council and the occult research club. The entire stage had been decorated for the occasion, with the floor being covered in a giant mat. On it stood Tsubaki, who would act as a referee, and Kiba, clad from head to toe in the designated kendo gear, and his shinai being held in his right hand in a strong grip. All the regular students and the teachers were as nervous as they were excited. The girls from the student council looked calm and collected and, from their expressions, anyone could tell they were looking forward to this match, apart from Sona. Her facial expression was as strict as always, but she was looking forward to this match as well. As for the occult research club, Kaneko was as emotionless as ever, but, on the inside, she was cheering her friend and comrade on. Akeno was smiling kindly, as was usual, but, on the inside, she was trying to erase the unease she felt, for some reason. As for Riaz, who was sitting in between Akeno and Kaneko, she wore an expressionless mask, mimicking her junior, in order to hide her nervousness. She wanted to see if her gamble would pay off. The pressure from her original home had started to rise as of late, and she wanted the most peaceful approach she could think of to gain Haidu's trust and recruit him. A human at this early of age that could outbest Kiba in swordsmanship would be a great addition for her immediate goal, as well as her future one. That said, Riaz, somewhat, regretted her decision to put her blonde servant on the spot like this. A simple spar between the two boys, with the student council and the occult research club as the sole viewers would have been fine, in her mind. As well as her intention to approach the Haidu boy easier. Sona just had to make this a formal exhibition match to get under Haidu's skin, due to the latter keeping his distance from the student council president, who was persistent in her attempts to recruit him in the student council and failed each and every time for an entire year. On the stage, Tsubaki stood calmly, a respectable distance behind Kiba, with the latter facing the double doors of the auditorium. The blonde felt his heartbeat rising by the second, knowing that this bar-no match would be nothing like the one from the day before. Yet, underneath a head mask, his face was set in an emotion he had been feeling for several years in a row, but it was strengthened for this occasion: determination. Once the double doors opened, several things happened at once. Issei entered, having the same demeanor as when he was told about this match. The only difference was that his entire posture screamed of an unnatural calmness. He didn't wear any piece of the kendo gear, just his school uniform, his bag on his left shoulder and his shinai in his right hand. Apart from the devils and the two people on the stage, all heads turned to look at him, and their breathing stopped altogether. Kiba felt like his imminent doom was way worse than he had imagined, but his determination held strong. The rest of the devils felt their instincts going haywire, and, lastly, Kaneko went rigid on her seat and her eyeballs dilated in horror. Time seemed to return as every student followed Issei's light feathered steps towards the stage, making no sound whatsoever, as he paid no mind to anything and anyone. For everyone present, it was like living the literal sense of the saying, the calm before the storm. All the devils present were ready to intervene should things get out of hand, apart from Kiba, who would be in the eye of said storm. They watched, wearily, as Issei took his spot opposite of Kiba, his expression, still, hidden by his front hair. The brunette shocked everyone present, devils included, with his awareness of his surroundings. Even with his eyes closed, Issei took off his shoes right before he stepped on the mat, while, also, leaving his bag on them, his movements making no noise to disturb the silence of the auditorium. The tension in the enclosed room had risen to unbearable levels in a matter of few seconds. The silence was as awkward as it was unbearable. "Was it your idea?" Issei's calm demand echoed throughout the deathly silent auditorium. He was standing in a deceptively relaxed stance, his right leg slightly more forward than his left, and his shin-eye almost touched the mat on his right from how loosely he seemed to hold it. Kiba observed the brunette's stance, and his instinct screamed at him to get the fuck out of there. Despite his lack of experience against another swordsman, apart from his sensei, the blonde could tell that his opponent was more than capable of maiming him. All of that took Kiba only a second to process, before he answered with all the honesty he could master. "Actually, Haidu-kun, the idea came from Riaz Butchu. Although, the original plan was for the two of us to have a simple spar with the only spectators being the student council and my own club, Shitori Kaichu decided to make it a spectacle for the whole school, for reasons I wasn't told. And, even though I had agreed with Riaz Butchu's idea for another spar with you, Haidu-kun, I wasn't expecting things to escalate this much, and I wasn't informed about the whole thing until lunch break," he explained, thoroughly, in one breath. He hoped it would be enough to not be maimed in the next few moments. "I see," was Issei's reply with a small tilt of his head, his demeanor not changing in the slightest. He believed the blonde's words because he didn't detect any lies in them. As it seemed, however, he needed to have a few words with Sona, Riaz and their followers sooner than he wanted. That said, he would have to talk to Sona, at the very least, about his stalker, in a discreet manner to not arouse suspicion of his involvement with the supernatural. Now, this problem would be addressed anyway. For some reason, the aforementioned devils felt like Kiba had just signed their death warrants with his words. Also, outside of Kuo Academy, a certain fallen angel felt a chill run down her spine, for reasons unknown to her. Kiba wanted to say one last thing before the match started. Haidu-kun, please accept my apology for this and, if you want, you can have a word with my club's president after this. He pleaded as he took his own stance, hoping against hope to get through the brunette's mind. Issei's next words were as surprising as they were foreboding. I don't mind, as long as Kaichu is there as well. He said with the same calmness that surrounded his being. Even if their expressions didn't change, Riaz and Sona felt like they were about to face someone dangerous. They were right, of course, but they didn't know it. Yet. It was when Issei continued speaking that the feeling magnified by a factor of 10. Once we are done here and everyone else goes to their homes, your club, the student council and myself will move to the kendo club to talk in private. It wasn't a suggestion from Issei's part. Thinking that he wouldn't notice with his eyes closed, both Riaz and Sona narrowed their eyes on him, feeling some kind of threat in his words, before exchanging a stiff nod between them, and then, refocused their eyes on him. Nothing else was said between the two males. Taking the hint, Tsubaki stepped forward and took the stage. Pun intended. The exhibition match between Kibayudo and Haidu Issei is about to begin. She announced in a normal voice, knowing that she could be heard throughout the silent auditorium. The rules are simple. You can use whichever style and swordsmanship you want to, aside from kendo. Each successful hit, no matter where it is inflicted upon, counts for 1 point. Be careful with the strength behind your swings, though, because the student council will not tolerate either of you inflicting any lasting damage to one another. Whoever lands 20 hits on his opponent first is the winner. Last, but not least, whoever gets out of the mat loses automatically. She explained, thoroughly, as she looked at both combatants. Kiba gave a mute nod, while Issei, audibly, tapped his shinai on the mat as a response. Tsubaki was annoyed that Haidu didn't even nod at her, but didn't show it. As the two boys had agreed a few moments ago, she would have the chance to express that annoyance a little later. Taking several steps back to give the two boys enough room to duke it out, she announced what everybody was waiting for. Nobody, not even Riaz, noticed Kaneko trembling in fear on her seat as she stared at the deceptively calm Issei. Then, begin. Both boys didn't move for several seconds after they got the okay from Tsubaki. Even if they were standing still, the tension in the room rose even higher than before. Underneath the head mask, even with his determined expression not breaking, Kiba was sweating slightly, and it wasn't due to how warm the kendo garbs were. The blonde boy didn't know if his adversary was proficient in any other styles of swordsmanship, apart from kendo, and that made him worry. That said, if he was to be humiliated, one way or another, in front of the entirety of the school populace no less, he might as well go down by fighting. The opposite of how he had gone down right before Riaz reincarnated him into a devil. From that point on, he had promised himself to never back down until his final breath. Even if the odds were highly against him, just like the match that had started a few seconds ago. Thankfully, this wasn't a fight to the death. His grip, with both hands, on the shinai tightened, along with his jaw, to signify the strength of his resolve. Yet, his eyes traced no move from the brunette. Neither instigating an attack, nor to defend himself. Kiba refrained from clicking his tongue in annoyance. He would have to be humiliated in front of a huge crowd, and he would have to make the first move. Talk about unfair. Just like that time from his past. At that thought, the blonde, almost, went berserk. Nonetheless, Kiba, finally, made the first move. And, with that, the exhibition match had, officially, started. Frustrating. Infuriating. And, most of all, humiliating. For the past 10 minutes, Kiba had tried every technique he was taught and performed it, perfectly, as fast as he could. At least, as fast as he was allowed to. He couldn't use his real speed in front of so many humane eyes. Nor his physical strength as a devil. Not that it would have made a difference, but that's beside the point for something he wasn't aware of. The fact of the matter was that Issei avoided all of his attacks, without even the need to block, with his eyes closed. Including the attacks Kiba managed to perform from behind the brunette. And all of that, Kiba could tell, with the absolute minimum of movement needed. How ridiculously absurd was that? And if that wasn't enough, the brunette had yet to attack, even when Kiba had purposefully left himself open due to his own attacks at the time. He didn't care about the students' odd gazes at his skills as a swordsman, nor about most of them cheering him on. After all, the people that didn't know the first thing about how to use a sword, they viewed the match as a simple spectacle. They didn't get the big picture. Issei was, actually, toying with him. He knew it. The girls from the kendo club knew it. The devils knew it. Yet, none of them could do anything about it, including himself. He didn't care for anything of the above. He only cared about his resolve to land a hit on his opponent and to not disappoint Riaz too much. Once those 10 minutes passed and Kiba was out of techniques, the boy decided to create some distance between himself and the brunette to think of a strategy. His breathing was a little labored from the exertion. After all, by holding back his speed and power as a devil, he had to use more than twice or thrice the stamina for the task at hand. After a couple of seconds, observing his infuriatingly calm opponent, who didn't seem winded in the slightest, Kiba re-evaluated his need of training from the bottom up to be his priority, once this farce of a match and the meeting afterwards were done and over with. Is that all? Issei's nonchalantly calm question brought him out of his musings. It, also, managed to bring silence to the auditorium, again. What? Kiba hoped he sounded calm as well when he asked that, trying to hide his trepidation. He could hear some shocked gasps from people that, just now, took notice of the brunette's excellent condition. Issei's demeanor and tone didn't change as he spoke. Was that all you had in terms of skill and techniques? He asked, ignoring the shocked gasps and indignant cries from the crowd for his behavior. Kiba didn't want to answer that. Either way, it was a lost battle before it had even begun. I'll take your silence as a yes, then. Issei's calm voice shut up the crowd. Kiba braced himself for anything the brunette could throw his way. That said, he had heard a saying from some boys that watched football as a hobby. The best defense is offense. Taking its literal sense in this instance, Kiba went back to the offensive. Though, he was more cautious about it. If he was lucky, he would get a hit on his adversary. The blonde went for the standard overhead slash. Apparently, the brunette, who, still, had his eyes closed, saw that coming and brought up his shinai to blow. Kiba never saw it coming. One hit for Haidu. Tsubaki announced to the stunned crowd that Issei scored the first hit. To her credit, her voice was calm and professional, even if she was shocked as well. The brunette had brought his shinai up and, instead of blocking Kiba's swing, he struck the blonde on the left wrist, freezing him in place. Although, he used the bare minimum of strength to just tap on his opponent's aforementioned body part. Kiba was so shocked that it took him 2 seconds to realize that Issei had retracted his shinai and returned to his spot, eyes still closed under his hair. Seeing the brunette so calm, sparked his anger even more. The blonde's next move was more aggressive. Yet, it had the same result as his first try after Issei decided to go on the offensive. 2 hits for Haidu. Tsubaki's announcement did nothing to alleviate his rising anger. It only reminded him that the brunette had hit him on his right wrist, this time. Another try. 3 hits for Haidu. Another failure. This time, it was the left elbow. Kiba's fury kept rising. 4 hits for Haidu. Right elbow. On and on it went, with Kiba's anger rising to a level comparable to his hatred for an object of his past, along with the people behind it. 2 shoulders. 2 hips, 2 knees. 2 legs. Waist, front and back. 2 lungs. Liver. Stomach. Heart. And, finally, 20 hits for Haidu. Winner of the exhibition match, 20-0-0, Haidu Issei. Tsubaki announced at the deathly silent auditorium as Issei tapped Kiba's head mask at its very top. Even if her voice was calm, the vice president of the student council was highly disturbed at what had transpired in just under a minute. And she wasn't the only one. Everybody had watched as, with the ease of breathing, Issei tapped all the vital parts on Kiba's body, despite the blonde's best efforts to either hit him or avoid being hit himself. Nobody had missed the hidden meaning that, were the match a real sword fight, Kiba would be, most certainly, dead in a matter of a few seconds. And the blonde boy got the message the loudest and clearest from everyone else. All done without evident effort. Nobody cheered on the brunette's win, not even the boy himself. See you at the kendo club, Kiba-kun. Issei's calm voice echoed throughout the auditorium as he went to put on his shoes and swung his bag on his left shoulder. He could feel the blonde's eyes on his person, as well as everybody else's, all pairs of eyes carrying various feelings on them, as he started to leave the same way he came. Without making a sound. The silence followed him until he was at the double doors. He was the one to break it again. For what it's worth, Kiba-kun, I'm truly sorry. It wasn't anything personal. Please, keep that in mind for when you and the others come to the kendo club. It was the first time everyone heard Issei changing his tone from that unnatural calmness. That said, they didn't expect him to sound, truly, apologetic. Even Kiba himself was brought out of his anger, if somewhat. The brunette didn't stay any longer and got out of the auditorium. The devils waited for everybody else to leave the auditorium before they approached the blond boy who had taken off his head mask, and his red from anger and exertion face was clear for everyone to see. His breathing had calmed down considerably, but it was still heavy from his feelings. Riaz, of course, took it upon herself to talk to him first. "Udo, despite the outcome, your skills were remarkable," she told him kindly, trying to keep all the negatives away from the small time they all had to discuss about the match before they went to the kendo club for the meeting. For once, Akeno didn't feel like teasing somebody and was in agreement with Ria's mindset. She wasn't even tittering. Just smiling, kindly, as always. "Riaz is right, Udo-kun," she said, simply, not knowing what else she could say to comfort the blond boy. Kiba looked them in the eyes, seeing their pride and compassion for him coming in waves. He was, almost, overwhelmed from their conveyed feelings from just a glance. Keyword being almost. Because, once he locked gazes with the ever-emotionless Kaneko, he felt like laughing to himself for his stupidity, that he expected something more from Kuo Academy's mascot, dubbed by the boys from school. If he had taken a closer look to her eyes, he would have seen the relief she felt for his well-being. The blonde managed to put his emotions about the match to the back of his mind, for the time being, in favor of offering his famous charming smile to the girls of his club. "Thanks, Riaz Butchu, Akeno-chan." Sona and her followers watched the interaction with indifferent gazes, since their mind was already at what they could possibly encounter at the kendo club. Sona's genius mind, for once, didn't help her much, if at all. She felt like that time on a certain hill a year ago, where she could do nothing but sit back and wait. This time, the circumstances were completely different in context, but had an eerily similar outcome at the same time. Speaking of time, they had a meeting to attend to. "Sorry to ruin your moment, Riaz, but we have to go. The sooner we get this over with, the better," Sona said in her usual business-like tone. Riaz was annoyed that she wasn't given more time to comfort her servant, but she also knew that her friend and rival was right. With a sigh, she nodded her agreement and took the lead towards the kendo club. Issei was sitting cross-legged on the kendo club's mat, his eyes open as he faced the entrance. He had calmed down enough for his eyes to return to their normal shape. Though, he, still, knew he was on the breaking point. That said, he didn't regret what he did at the match, per se. The demonstration as to how he could slowly kill a person within moments wasn't something he wanted to perform on Kiba. After all, he felt a connection with the blonde boy, akin to the one he had with Rin when he was little. So, no, Issei didn't want to do that to the first person he had a connection with for the first time in the last few years. Apart from his parents, of course. He could have just enjoyed the moment with his new friend and have a simple spar like the day before. However, irrational as it was and the brunette himself knew it, he didn't like that people got involved with his life, as if it didn't matter to them. Additionally, Riaz and Sona did it to get under his skin, for one reason or another. Issei didn't like the way these two devils forced themselves in his friendship with Kiba. Unfortunately, the blonde was the one to pay the price for their interference, which pained, immeasurably, the brunette's heart. Again, he could have done many things to prevent that from happening, but he refused to use the easy way out. After all, apart from his parents, Rin's parents and Rin herself, he had grown up in solitude. If his new friend was to leave him, especially after what happened a few minutes ago, then he would understand and not even complain. Just like he hadn't complained when Rin told him she would move to England almost a decade ago. That said, it didn't mean it wouldn't hurt. His two tenants hadn't said a word to him. Surprising, as well as worrying, especially in Zangetsu's case, but he guessed he would talk to them in his sleep. That, or they would try to kill him as soon as he got in his mindscape, which was the norm the last couple of weeks. Issei sighed in dejection as he frowned. The first 2 days of his second year in high school were nothing like he wanted them to be. Peaceful and quiet. And his fallen angel stalker didn't make his days any easier. The brunette rubbed the bridge of his nose at that thought in annoyance. He couldn't dwell on his thoughts any further because the doors in front of him opened. First came in the beautiful redhead, Gremory Riaz, her expression, surprisingly, friendly towards him. She was followed by the rest of her club, as well as the student council. Though, the latter consisted, only, of Sona and Tsubaki, unsurprisingly. Issei, with barely a glance, took notice of everyone's expression towards his person. Riaz seemed friendly, Akeno was her usual smiley self, while Kaneko was like an expressionless doll. Sona and Tsubaki were their usual strict selves. However, Kiba, the one that mattered the most to the brunette, was, visibly, conflicted. Understandable. Between what happened in the match and his apology to the blonde, it was natural for the latter to feel that way. "Hello, Haidu-kun. I hope you're feeling well." Riaz greeted him in what he perceived as a kind and friendly manner. He wasn't feeling well, by the way. He stood up to greet them himself. Thank you for your concern, Ria-san. He said, honestly, avoiding answering the question as he gave her a nod in acknowledgement. Despite her surprise, the Redeed caught on to the small detail, as well as the fact he had forgotten formalities, which made her friendly smile widen a fraction. First name basis already? Then, can I call you Ice as well? She asked in a teasing tone, but liked the way his name got out of her mouth. Something to ponder at a later time. He could see that everyone was surprised at his current demeanor and the way he spoke. Kaneko and Sona were the most difficult to see through since their expressions didn't break, but their eyes conveyed their feelings, which was enough. I'm not one for formalities, Ria-san. He told her with a careless shrug of his shoulders. So, you can call me however you want. His tone was indifferent as he spoke. Riaz took a very quick moment to examine his body language because something in the way he spoke rubbed her the wrong way. The brunete's posture was relaxed, so nothing was worrying there. His eyes that's what was wrong. The brunete's eyes showed resignation. It seemed his match against Kiba had affected him as much as the blonde and everyone else, if not more. Irideed suppressed a resigned sigh. All her servants had very problematic pasts. So, why did she expect her potential servant to be a normal case? All that took just a second to process in her mind. She wasn't a genius like Sona, but she had experience on problematic children, and Issei was another one, in her mind. On a side note, her motherly instincts made her want to glomp him and spoil him as much as she could, but she had to, forcibly, restrain herself from doing so. Then, I will call you Ice, from now on. Ria spoke confidently, albeit elegantly, her smile widening at this turn of events. That said, I didn't like the way you used my friend to get to meet me. She spoke too soon. The situation was worse from what she had imagined. She saw how his eyes turned into a glare as he spoke in a cold tone. That said, even Kiba himself was shocked at Issei's declaration of friendship between the two of them. Then, as if he had dismissed Ria's presence altogether, the brunete's eyes locked with Sona's. And you. I didn't expect you would go so far as to have me and Kiba fight one another in front of the whole school, just because. There's a thing called privacy. I like mine. I've grown up being alone and private, and I won't tolerate anyone compromising it, even if it's the student council. He ranted angrily. On a side note, it was the first time that somebody had tore Sona down and was right about it. Even worse, she could not even find words to refute the one doing that to her. It hurt her in a very unfamiliar way, and she didn't like it at all. The small crowd was forced into a short, stunned silence, which he broke, again, as he looked at the blonde boy. His expression was soft, as well as the tone he used to speak with. In hindsight, it was astounding how he could change his mood at a drop of a hat. Again, Kiba-kun, I'm truly sorry about what happened in the match. I, sincerely, hope we can remain friends. Though, I would completely understand if you don't want to. What he did next, however, stopped their breathing. Issei went in front of the, still, stunned blonde boy before he bowed in a doggy's style, with his forehead touching the mat. It was his way of apologizing, and he didn't feel ashamed for doing so in the slightest. Kiba was so shocked and touched at the action that his anger at the brunette evaporated in an instant. A long awkward silence ensued for the group of devils as they stared at the bowing brunette, who didn't seem ready to stand up anytime soon. Kiba felt a stare on his person. Raising his head to meet the source, he wasn't surprised to see that both Riaz and Kaneko gave him the same, meaningful, stare. Although, their expressions differed, with Kaneko being expressionless and Riaz smiling in compassion and kindness. The girls mimicked each other as they nodded at him at the same time, as if telling him to accept this kind of apology. The blonde returned his gaze at the, still, silent and bowing brunette before him. He didn't know why, but he felt like a small weight had been lifted off of his shoulders. And the reason for that was the boy he was looking at. What happened in the match was inconsequential. The outcome would have been the same, even if Issei had decided to spar with him the same way as the day before. With his mind finally clear, Kiba understood that Issei was trying to give everyone a message, especially to Riaz and Sona. It's okay, Hayano, Ice-kun. Kiba, finally, found his voice and spoke softly as well, correcting himself midway in his small speech. His lips formed another genuine smile once the brunette raised his head and he presented his hand to help his new friend on his feet. Issei was, visibly, glad that his apology was accepted and, eagerly and gratefully, used the blonde's hand to rise on his feet. A childish toothy grin Issei sported on his face managed to make the hearts of Riaz, Akeno, Sona and Kaneko to skip some beats. Kiba's too, but for an entirely different reason. It, also, conveyed his happiness and gratefulness at the blonde's acceptance. His moment of happiness was ruined when his mind, ironically, reminded him of a certain pest problem. Talk about bad timing. Nevertheless, now was as good a time as any to report it. The brunette took a step back as he retracted his hand from the firm handshake with the blonde. His face turned serious as he addressed the student council president. Thankfully, he did so with the name she gave him. Saona-san, despite my words earlier, you're still Kaichu. I don't know why, but for the last couple of days, I feel like I'm being followed from home to here and vice versa. He said, his words coming out of his mouth clearly, knowing he had to remain hidden for as long as he could. His serious claim sombered the mood of everybody present in half a second flat. It also killed Kiba's questions as to what, exactly, the brunette wanted to convey through their match. None of the evils showed it, but they were on high alert. Though, Ria's and Sona's faces turned serious as well. They had a hunch as to who was following him around, assuming, of course, his accusation held merit. Said girls exchanged a brief glance, which withheld an entire conversation, before Sona faced the brunette once again. She fixed her glasses before she spoke with the same seriousness as him. I'll see what I can do, Haidu-kun. She didn't know why, but she saw a bit of disappointment in his eyes. Again, it hurt her, but it wasn't the time to discuss such matters. She would have to wait for her chance to redeem herself to the one that she was interested in. It wasn't long before Issei left the kendo club, with the two boys promising each other to meet at the kendo club the next day, before their classes started, for a friendly spar. The rest had just bid their goodbyes, for the time being, and vice versa. Once the brunette left, the devils went to the student council office to have a private discussion. Kusakari, Hanakai Momo and Tsubasa Yura had been dismissed from Sona and were allowed to go to their homes. So, Tsubaki would have to relay to them any important information, should the need arise. After the devils made themselves comfortable in the office, Akeno excused herself to go make tea for everybody. Kaneko was out of luck though. It seemed the student council didn't have any snacks left. Oh, bummer. Anyhow, once everyone had their first sip of Akeno's exquisite tea, the meeting began. So, it seems we have some fallen angels pests in our town. Ria started as she took another sip of her tea. Despite the calmness she spoke with, there was no mistaking the expertly hidden hostility. And, it seems, they're onto Haidu-kun's sacred gear. They will either try to recruit him or outright kill him. Sona got straight to the point in her usual business-like tone. That's troublesome. Akeno said, stiffly. The race they were talking about disgusted her to no end. Kaneko and Tsubaki kept silent. The former more for the fact that she didn't have sweets to munch on than having nothing to comment on the topic. Kiba just leaned on the wall by the window with his arms crossed against his chest, looking thoughtful. If he had anything to say, he would, politely as always, offer his input. What's worse, Ria's had steel in her tone, as well as her eyes that looked at nothing in particular. The crows came into our territory without Sona's or my own permission. And they're after a cowhide of ours. This is unacceptable. I agree. If Ria's had steel, then Sona's voice was like titanium. Anyone that threatens the well-being of my students will face severe consequences. It was Sona's possessive tone that irked Ria's a little bit, but she knew better than to address something inconsequential in the middle of a serious meeting. That said, she, wholeheartedly, agreed with the severe consequences part. Especially since a close person to one of her cute servants was directly involved. So, what will we do about them, Sona? Tsubaki, curiously, asked. Nothing that will cause a serious incident. Sona didn't miss a bit. They, probably, know this is a devil territory owned by the Gremory and Citri heiresses and protected by their respective peerages. So, they won't do anything drastic to draw unwanted attention. Unless they're stupid enough, or rogues. She analyzed aloud as she crossed her arms under her bust and frowned in thought. Everyone nodded in agreement with her sound logic. Then, what do we do about the one following Ice-kun? Kiba asked, seriously, worried for his friend's safety. This time, it was Ria's who spoke. One of our own will have to be Ice's shadow. Should the fallen angel make their move, we have to know immediately. After that, we will act accordingly. She replied with equal seriousness. Despite not looking at one another, Ria's felt the blonde boy nod her way in satisfaction. Then, the redeed continued as she faced her white-haired junior. Can you please do it, Kaneko-chan? She kindly asked with a small smile. Yes was all Kaneko said in a monotone, accompanied with a small nod of her head. Ria's smile widened at that. Her cute servants made her very proud with how they were coming along. What do we do in case the crow makes contact with Haidu-kun? Akeno, curiously, asked, her face contorting in pure disgust at the emphasized word. That was the million-yen question. The devils couldn't do anything without causing a major incident between the two races. Issei may have been a person of interest for the devils, but he was a free game for everybody else to claim. That said, the devils had an advantage over every other supernatural species. Then, I'll just have to convince him to come on our side. Kiba, unsurprisingly, was the one to say something like this, albeit with a great amount of conviction. Assuming that the fallen angels don't do anything drastic, apart from just talking to him, of course. After all, I can talk to Ice-kun tomorrow morning before or after our spar. He added as an afterthought. A good plan, but a little bit drastic. Sona's partial approval wasn't what the blonde boy expected to hear. You should just invite him to the occult research club after school in case the talk leads you to reveal the supernatural to him. That way, Hyudu-kun will stay concentrated in his classes and there's absolutely no chance of another student learning about our world by an honest accident. She, thoroughly, explained. Kiba had to give her credit. The girl was a genius for a reason. Everyone else in the room, himself included, were averagely smart, with Riaz being a couple of levels above them. Without anyone noticing, Riaz felt relieved about Sona's suggestion. Despite her smarts, the same suggestion never even crossed her mind and, for that, she felt ashamed. However, that suggestion opened the way for If Issei to come her way and, possibly, become her servant. Irideed hid her satisfaction at the last thought by drinking the last of her tea. Now then, she gained the attention of the room as she stood up. Since we made a solid plan, I believe we should all return to our duties. She, casually, said, albeit in a weirdly formal tone. Sona just nodded at her and, immediately, she immersed herself on her paperwork. Riaz and her peerage took that as their cue to leave. Unbeknownst to them, the very person they were interested in had listened to their entire conversation. Contrary to popular belief, having ears that could listen to even the smallest of sounds from miles away is a curse as it is a blessing. Issei knew that very well, since he had grown up with such sensitive ears. There were many sounds he had to filter out of his ears in order to listen to what was discussed between the devils. Especially since he had to do that from his home. That said, he didn't know what to think of the devil's conversation. Nor about his stalker. That fallen angel was, surely, persistent in what she was doing. And it grated on his nerves that he had yet to see her face. And, because he didn't want to show her that he knew of her, the brunette allowed her to feel a sense of security that she wouldn't be compromised anytime soon. At the very least, he was glad that his stalker had yet to approach him directly. According to the devils, it wouldn't be long before she did just that, with her intentions being unclear. What do you guys say about all this? He, mentally, asked his tenants for their opinions as he worked on his homework. Don't look at me, he can multitask. You should get laid with the fallen angel and, then, bang the devil girls. Especially Sona. She needs this as much as you do. Issei stopped writing out of pure astonishment, his eyes wide like saucers and his jaw hanging loosely. Not because of the suggestion itself, but because Zangetsu was serious about it. Nonchalant as well. What kind of person do you think I am? Issei cried out in his head, indignantly. A future prude, if you won't do it. Zangetsu didn't miss a beat, sounding still, serious and nonchalant. No. I don't want to be a prude, but I won't have sex with any girl who just gains my fancy either. It has to be consensual, damn it. The brunette mentally shouted in embarrassed conviction. Zangetsu merely sighed in disappointment, not offering any other words on the matter. For the sake of his sanity, Issei didn't comment on it. It was then that Drake decided to make his presence known to his wielder. Don't listen to the sword, yet, partner. The dragon said, seriously. Zangetsu gave Drake the equivalent of the bird as a response to the way he was addressed. He was ignored. Issei breathed a mental sigh of relief before the dragon's words sank in. Wait. What do you mean yet? He asked in trepidation. He was ignored as well. This is a great opportunity for all of us. Since that boy with the sacred gear accepted your friendship, we could use that to our advantage. Issei sombered up at that, for the time being, forgetting the previous ridiculousness. He didn't like the words the dragon used, but it must have been done for a reason that eluded his brain. Go on. He, mentally, prodded. The dragon gave a grunt as if he was clearing his throat before he spoke. As the devil said, he will invite you to their den, probably using your friendship to do so, as it is a way that wouldn't leave you suspicious of his motives. Anyway, once you go there, this Riaz girl will, most definitely, try to sway you on their side. What makes you so sure? Issei interrupted the dragon's explanation with his curious question. Drake wasn't offended because it showed that his wielder paid close attention to his words. The devils know they don't have much time until your stalker makes her move. And, since you have a sacred gear, they want you on their side in case they go to war with their enemies. So, they have to be a little passive-aggressive to their approach. In my honest opinion, you should ally yourself with the devils in your school. I think that it was a given, considering me and Kiba are friends. Issei said in confusion. I mean tomorrow, partner. Drake said more firmly to hide his exasperation. He could feel his host's surprise, so he elaborated. When they reveal their true nature to you, you will do the same, but just as the Red Dragon Emperor. Keep the sword and your other powers hidden, for the time being. Even allies need to build up their trust between each other. Good point. The brunette conceded. And, when all is said and done, bang that Ria's girl. I like her hair. Not you too. The next day, Issei dragged his feet to school. He did manage to get on time for his promised spar with Kiba, though. He was so tired from his deadly spars with dragons and Jetsu the night before that, on the way to school, he caught himself not caring about his stalker's eyes on his person. She could go fuck herself senseless for all he cared. Due to an unwilling shiver down his spine. It seemed that, yesterday, Zangetsu influenced him more than he cared to admit. Anyway. The brunette had his private spar with his friend and was invited to the latter's clubroom after school ended. Just as planned by both sides. Classes were awkward that day. Issei was ashamed that his display made all the regular humans, even the teachers, to fear him. And it was worse than when he was younger. He didn't show it, but the looks of fear he was getting all around hurt his heart more than a stab from Zangetsu at the aforementioned body part. Even the perverted duo and Kiryuika kept their distance from him, not even telling him a single comment. It got even worse when he had to go to the kendo club. For the first time, Issei saw the girls, even Kadis and Murayama, trembling at the mere sight of him. The brunette had endured the pain in his heart as he instructed them on their katas. Honestly, he would have preferred the disgusted gazes he was getting from the perverted duo every day, instead of the fear. To his credit, Issei kept his small smile intact throughout the day. Though, when Kiba came to his class, things got a little chaotic. The girls swooned at the blonde's mere presence, ignoring the perverted duo's cries for his and the brunette's deaths. However, when Kiba asked Issei directly to come with him to the occult research club because of Ria's Grimory's personal invitation, all hell broke loose. Mitsuda and Motohama cursed the brunettes and the blonde's existences more fervently and animatedly, while the girls shouted their daydreams about what the Dragon of Kuo would do to the Prince of Kuo and the girls of the occult research club, or weird combinations of all. The brunette didn't miss the hypocrisy. The girls were worse than Mitsuda and Motohama combined, yet they shunned them as perverts. Somewhere deep inside him, the brunette thought that those two could be his best friends. Unbeknownst to everyone in this universe, 3 certain people at another galaxy sneezed. To his morbid amusement, Issei found it easier to slip out of class with Kiba amidst the chaos. Once entering the old school building, where, apparently, the occult research club resided in, Issei felt a little creeped out. The only light in the hallways and staircases were some lit candles on the walls. There weren't even windows. That door covered in yellow tape with the sign "Keep Out" didn't help matters at all. Its only solace was that it was well maintained. On the inside, at least. The outside needed some serious work to be done. "We're here, Ice-kun." Kiba's announcement brought him out of his reverie. The blonde was smiling at him, and he could see that it was genuine. He, also, took notice the heavy-looking double doors behind his friend. The brunette felt like they were about to enter a creepy dungeon to save a damsel in distress. Why is this building so creepy? Issei, finally, asked the question that had been in his mind since he entered, staring at the blonde in honest confusion. And apprehension. Contrary to what Issei expected, Kiba simply smirked in amusement. "It's in the name, Ice-kun." The brunette felt like facepalming. It was as obvious as it was stupid. Instead, he opted to sigh in exasperation. "Let's just get in the dungeon, or whatever awaits us behind these doors." Kiba snorted in a vain attempt to hold his laughter in. Unfortunately, he had to end his fun with his friend due to the meeting they were about to attend. So, forcibly schooling himself, the blonde gave the right door 3 light knocks. "Enter." Issei recognized Ria's welcoming voice as Kiba opened both doors inwards and entered first, followed by the brunette a couple of steps behind. "I've brought him, Ria's butchu." Issei was curious as to why his friend sounded so formal before the latter took a seat on an empty couch and invited him to join in. In just a second, the brunette took notice of the Victorian-styled room. The only sources of light were some candles here and there, as well as the sunlight entering from a window to the left, which shone upon Ria's friendly smiling face. Slightly behind and to the left of Ria's was the kindly smiling visage of the ideal Yamato Nadeshiko, otherwise known as Himejima Ikeno. On the couch opposite of his friend sat Kaneko, who was, slowly, munching on some cookies. Somehow, even as he greeted them with the bare minimum of respect, Issei just knew this meeting would be nothing like he expected. "Hello, Ria-san, Akeno-san, Kaneko-san. Please, take care of me." Ria's gestured at him to take a seat wherever he pleased. Naturally, Issei sat at the opposite end of the couch his friend occupied, effectively placing him closer to the door should the need for an escape arose. Not that he believed it would come to that, but anyway. Riaz gave a smiling nod to her friend, Akeno, seemingly as a signal for something. He was proven correct in his assumption as, with a matching nod of her own, Akeno walked towards the back of the room. The brunette heard some noises from what appeared to be a kitchenette, which it was, and, through his experience with his mother, he guessed that the Yamato Nadeshiko was making tea. He hoped Akeno's tea was, at the very least, as tasty as his mother's. His thoughts about the oncoming tea came to a stop as his attention was taken by Riaz, who elegantly stood up from her chair and, with the same elegance, came to the front of her desk. There, she leaned on it and crossed her arms under her impressive breasts, making them more prominent. Issei, wisely, kept his eyes on hers, his expression calm. Though, through his peripheral vision, he had caught every movement she made. And, due to the teasing he got from his two tenants in his soul, he didn't want to give them any more food for teasing him by, openly, checking the receipt out. He had to admit, though. Riaz was the embodiment of elegance and beauty, as far as he was concerned. She was, almost, like a princess. As for Riaz herself, she was, inwardly, disappointed that she didn't get a reaction out of the brunette. However, at the very least, he was a gentleman in her eyes, like her blonde servant. Now, Ice, since you remember all of us, I believe introductions have no point. Riaz spoke kindly, with a hint of mirth in her voice. That's true. The brunette agreed with a nod of his head. So, what, exactly, do you want to talk about? He asked, feigning curiosity. Riaz's smile widened at his question. However, before she could say anything, Akeno entered the scene. The brunette carried a tray with a steaming teapot and 5 empty cups. Akeno served Issei first, seeing that he was a guest, before doing the same for everyone else, leaving herself for last. The brunette bent in a way to show her cleavage to Issei, doing so in a way that she would force his attention on her in a teasingly seductive manner. She was left, internally, disappointed that he closed his eyes in a deliberate way to avoid looking at her amazing breasts. Riaz felt vindictive pleasure at the sight, as if she had one-upped her queen in a silent competition between just the two of them. Everyone took a moment to taste Akeno's tea. The devils were, visibly, surprised that Issei took a sip without flinching from its steaming temperature. The brunette didn't pay them any mind, though. He put on the most serious expression he could master as he turned his head to face the brunette. In that short moment, the tension in the room rose to, almost, unbearable levels, for reasons that eluded the devils' minds. Then, Issei broke the silence. "Don't let my mother taste your tea," he said, his tone so serious that sounded grim. The tension rose even higher, but, for Akeno, turned into bewilderment. "Why, Haidu-kun?" she asked as calmly as she could, hiding her apprehension. Issei leaned on the back of the couch, idly noting that it was comfortably soft, closed his eyes and crossed his arms on his chest. His expression turned grim as he spoke. "Because, Akeno-san," he paused as he heard 3 simultaneous gulps. "My mother will make me marry you the next instant, demanding several grandchildren for her to spoil, and won't take no for an answer from either of us." The tension in the room died a brutal death at his words. "You're serious?" Kiba started with a strained smile, trying his hardest not to outright laugh at the absurdity he had just heard. Kaneko deadpanned as she stared hard at the close-eyed brunette. He, only, nodded in response, his expression not changing in the slightest. Riaz felt her eyebrow twitch in annoyance. Her best friend and servant won one over her without even trying. Or, at least, actively. Akeno's bewilderment turned to visible amusement. "Raufufufu, I'll take that as a compliment, Haidu no Ice Kun," she tittered behind a delicate hand, hiding the teasing smile she adored under said hand. "Though, I cannot say I would mind to do such things with a cute young man like yourself in the future," she, shamelessly, teased. Both Ria's eyebrows twitched erratically in pure annoyance. Though, she didn't say anything just yet. Kiba's strained smile became awkward as he turned his head to look at his friend. Said boy, fortunately, didn't seem to rise to the bait. Kaneko just returned to drinking her tea and eating her snacks, already losing interest in the topic of conversation. Issei, finally, opened his eyes and turned his head towards Akeno's direction, locking gazes with her. Serious dark green met playful violet. "In case I have an opportunity to get to know you better, I, honestly, wouldn't mind either." It was the seriousness he spoke with that made Akeno gain a dust of pink on her cheeks as her eyes widened a little and her heart skipped a beat. Riaz took a deep breath and exhaled it in a slow fashion in order to calm her rapidly thinning patience. For some reason, she didn't like the duo's flirting. She suppressed a childish pout. She wanted to be flirted like that as well, damn it. Kiba was, inwardly, praising his friend for the latter's balls to say something like that to one of the great One-Isamas and, actually, mean it, as it seemed. Even though he wasn't interested in Riaz and Akeno in that way, he couldn't deny their beauty, nor he couldn't respect the person hitting on them. In layman's terms, Kiba's respect for Issei rose at that moment. Especially because the brunette made quick work of Akeno's teasing. Rias coughed in her delicate hand to return the attention to her and break the stare off between Issei and Akeno, with the latter having become skittish and fidgety under the brunette's intense gaze. As fun as this banter was, no, it wasn't for her, which was why she allowed some of her annoyance to slip in her voice. Let's get back on track, please. Akeno didn't seem to like her friend's interference and was about to tease her. However, an intense, as brief as it was, not now glare stopped her in her tracks. She did giggle behind her hand with a winner's look in her eyes, though. As if she would let the redeed have the last word. Rias, quite forcibly, suppressed her boiling annoyance as she faced the calm brunette. So, Ice, what do you know about the occult culture? She asked in genuine curiosity, although in a vague manner. Her tone had turned friendly as well, wanting this meeting to go smoothly. Issei didn't expect that vague of a question and took a thoughtful expression, taking a moment to collect his thoughts on the matter. As well as have a quick conversation with one of his tenants. Greg, what do you think I should say? Don't say that you outright believe the pantheons exist. Just that you know about them. We'll see from there. Thanks, partner. I've read about all kinds of mythologies, Ria-san. We're even taught about some of them in school. Issei answered. Though not completely honest, he didn't outright lie. Ria's smile widened a fraction. Then, what do you know about the Christian pantheon? Where is she go? Oh, she's trying to tell me they're all devils in a gentle way. I'll play, since she's nice and kind enough to do so. Issei thought to himself in realization. Almost a decade ago, I had a friend that she and her parents were Catholics. I've read about the pantheon, but just enough to know its history. I'm, generally, not a religious person. My parents too. He, honestly, replied. Now, Rias was even more interested. Though, she chose to divert her attention elsewhere for a moment. Forgive me if I'm rude, but where is your friend? She asked curiously, hiding her motives. If his friend was close by, she could get 2 servants in one fell swoop. She felt regret for asking such a personal question due to her curiosity upon seeing a sad smile appear on his lips. The brunette, also, gained a faraway look, making his expression seem nostalgic. Rin and her parents moved to England when we were 7 years old. She was my only friend back then. Still was, until I met Kiba. Even Kaneko's eyes softened at his touching words. It went without question that it was the case for the other 2 girls as well. As for the blonde boy himself, he felt pleasantly surprised to hear that. I'm sorry if I brought you grief, Ice. Ria said apologetically. Don't be. Issei shook his head at her, his expression turning soft. You didn't know, so it's okay. He added, before he cleared his throat and his demeanor turned, slightly, serious. Anyway. As I said before, I'm not a particularly religious person. So, I know the basics for the Christian pantheon. Rias was glad about the change in topic. Especially because it brought the conversation back on track. She put on a mysterious smile as she spoke. Then, what if I told you that there are more information about this particular religion, even before the church was divided between Orthodox and Catholic? She asked in a tone between mysterious and rhetorical. She knows how to keep people interested in what she has to say. He didn't know why, but the brunette liked that fact about her. Personally, I wouldn't outright believe you, nor would dismiss whatever you try to sell. Issei said diplomatically. Noticing her smile widening a fraction, he guessed that his answer was what she wanted to hear. Then, Rias narrated about the Great War he had heard from Drake a year ago. She even included the 2 heavenly dragons in her story, which he found unexpected. As if that wasn't enough, she even explained the concept of sacred gears, albeit calling them holy artifacts. Unlike the dragon in his soul, however, Rias seemed to know the outcome of the Great War. Apparently, the 4 great Satans Mau, the original ones, died in that war before the 3 enemy races called for a ceasefire between them. Something that, according to Rias, was, still, active even as they spoke. Interesting story, so far, Rias-san. Issei told her, honestly, noticing her mysterious smile widening even more as she sipped the last of her tea to hydrate her mouth. But, why are you telling me, of all people, this? He asked, feigning genuine curiosity. After all, he knew where she wanted to go with this conversation. Ria's expression didn't change in the slightest at his question. The only thing changing within the room was that Akeno, now, stood on Ria's left, with Kiba standing up and taking his position beside the brunette, while Kaneko stood on Ria's right. Apart from Kaneko, who was as expressionless as ever, everyone else was smiling at him. There are 3 reasons for that, Ice. Ria spoke in a mysterious yet friendly manner. One of them being that I believe you are in the possession of a holy artifact, which, as it's currently known, is called a sacred gear. She explained in the same tone. Issei's reaction to that was feigned skepticism by raising an eyebrow. Undeterred, Riaz continued. Secondly, I am quite certain that the person following you that you told us yesterday is of one of the races I spoke about throughout the story just a few moments ago. More specifically, it is a fallen angel. She paused just a moment in her revelation for her words to sink in. Seeing his continued skepticism, Riaz decided to finish her revelation to get it out of her system and this meeting to end sooner rather than later. Her cute servants had their contracts to prepare for. That said, she, also, decided to add a dramatic flourish. She revealed her small black leathery wings, followed by those of her servants. Idly, Issei noted that Akeno had, only, revealed her right wing. And, as for us, we're devils. Just like the ones I told you about from the small story. A moment of silence ensued, with the brunette examining the small wings. Though they were folded to a great degree, Issei believed that their total span would be around each devil's height, if a little smaller. The silence turned awkward as Ria's followers turned to her as they noticed Issei's reaction. Or, more accurately, lack of a certain reaction they were expecting. Once more, tension rose in the room as the devils watched in bewilderment as the brunette's expression turned serious and he stood up from the couch. Then, without making any noise, he walked towards Riaz, his eyes never leaving her wings. He stopped an arm's length away from her, making the tension rise unbelievably. So much so that Akeno, Kaneko and Kiba were ready to take action. They almost did when Issei rose his left hand and caressed Ria's right wing, his expression changing to a mildly surprised one. For her part, Riaz did everything she could to not squirm at his touch. After all, her wings were very sensitive. He's so gentle and warm, she dreamily thought, a faint dust of rosy red on her cheeks being the only indication of her thoughts about him. They're soft. Not what I imagined them to be. Issei muttered as he retracted his hand and looked at it before he turned around and went back to his seat, eyes still on his hand, as if trying to memorize the sensation of Ria's wing just by looking at his appendage. By doing that, he missed Ria's adorable pout. She really liked the sensation of his hand on her wing. She shook her head. That wasn't the point at the moment. Ria's head cleared at the drop of a hat. He wasn't shocked, just skeptical. It was expected, considering his words of neutrality at her question about his belief in the three factions of the Christian pantheon. That is, before her revelation of hers and her cute servant's true nature. At that point, she expected him to be shocked. And he wasn't. Something that raised all the red flags in her entire being. Ria's expression turned deadly serious, while, from the corner of her eyes, she saw her servants being suspicious. Even Kaneko looked at the brunette the same way Akeno and Kiba did. Though, the latter seemed a little reluctant about it. Who are you, Haidu? Riaz, strongly, demanded as her posture seemed ready for battle. She was proud of her cute servants taking positions to defend her, if need be, without even telling them, as well as allowing her vision of her target. In this case, the calm brunette. He, absently, hummed. He turned his head and, after a couple of blinks, he, finally, noticed their suspicious glares. Inwardly, he was hurt that Kiba wore the same expression as the others. Even if he understood the reason for their hostile expressions, it didn't hurt any less that his friend was amongst them. Issei sighed in dejection, his head hanging in defeat. This wasn't supposed to happen. He wanted to be allies with the devils before him. The devils tensed at his odd behavior. Well, it's not what I had in mind, but it'll have to do. Whatever the devils expected to hear, this wasn't it. Ria's eyes narrowed dangerously. What nonsense are you spouting, Haidu? For that matter, you haven't answered my question. She demanded in a tone that matched her eyes. Issei breathed another dejected sigh as he stood up and faced them. Despite their confusion about his defeated expression, the devils didn't relax their postures. Relax, Ria-san. She, obviously, didn't, if her thunderous expression was any indication. Okay. The brunette sighed. How about I reintroduce myself, then? He asked in a hopeful tone with his hands rising in a placating fashion. Riaz just nodded her agreement, her suspicion equal to her curiosity about the individual before her. Seeing her nod, Issei went in between the coffee table and the double doors behind him. Then, with his expression turning serious, he rose his left arm close to his chest. His entire posture was formal as he faced the devils. My name is Haidu Issei, although you can call me Ice. Also he paused in his introduction as a flash of crimson light enveloped his left arm. As that happened, the devils were caught off guard and had to shield their eyes from the brightness of the crimson light, brief as it was. When they reopened them, Issei wished he had a camera to capture their gobsmacked expressions for future reference and, potentially, blackmail material. He held himself back, in favor of finishing his introduction. That said, he allowed a knowing smirk to appear on his face. His voice turned prideful as he spoke. You guessed right. The gauntlet you see on my hand signifies I am the host of Drag. I am this generation's Red Dragon Emperor, or in the Japanese term, the Sekiryuite. I hope we can be allies. So, please take care of me. Rias couldn't believe her eyes. Not that her subordinates fared any better. Right before their eyes was the honest Tamayu, Sekiryuite. His claim about them becoming allies, Rias admitted to herself, caught her, completely, off guard. Suddenly, her mind came to a grinding halt upon remembering something, which connected a couple of dots. Ria's soft yet disbelieving voice as she addressed him brought the attention of the room to her, making them notice her wide trembling eyes. You're the person we were looking for a year ago. Akeno's eyes immediately mimicked those of her best friend before her head snapped towards the brunette. Said person was calm, yet wore a knowing smirk on his face. He said nothing in response, though. Slowly, all the devils relaxed their postures, seeing his calmness. Issei's knowing smirk dropped, his expression turning soft as he looked at them, mostly Ria's, and he dismissed his sacred gear, leaving his arm bare, again. Yeah, that was me activating the boosted gear for the first time, up on a hill at the edge of Kuo. He confirmed her claim. Rias relaxed even more at his words. Surprisingly shocking as this revelation was, the brunette seemed harmless towards them. In fact, he had proposed an alliance between them at the end of his introduction. The fact that he released no aura whatsoever was another plus in her mind. Everyone, calm down. Even as she ordered her subordinates, she did it in a soft motherly tone. Issei caught onto that fact, and his respect for the Redeed rose even more. As soon as Ria's words reached their minds, the three beside her completely relaxed their postures to non-threatening ones. Kiba's face adorned an awkward smile as he spoke. Sorry about that, Ice-kun. He apologized for his earlier demeanor. Issei just nodded at him in understanding with a matching smile. The blonde sighed in relief at that. He didn't want his friendship to be ruined because he was about to protect his superior. Kaneko took the initiative and returned to the couch she occupied before. Her eyes, though, didn't stray from the brunette as if he was, still, a threat to herself and everybody else, especially Rias. Issei took notice of it but didn't have a reaction. That said, he followed her example and returned to his seat. There wasn't any reason to not be comfortable anymore now that his introduction was over. Kiba was next to have a seat. This time, he sat opposite of Issei on the same couch as Kaneko. It was just in case the need arose and he had to act. Rias, again, leaned back on her desk with Akeno standing by her side. After a long awkward silence, the Redeed decided to start the conversation again. So, Ice, you said you wanted to be allies with us? She asked conversationally, wanting this to be as civil as possible. Yeah. Issei nodded in agreement with a small smile. After all, we have something in common. He added. And that is? Rias rose a skeptical eyebrow as she crossed her arms under her breasts. She wasn't willing to trust him completely after his revelation, which clashed violently with her desire to recruit him in her peerage. Everyone missed Kaneko's minuscule twitch at that gesture. To protect Kuo from any threats, of course. The brunette said as if it was obvious, unaware of the Redeed's thoughts about him. Rias didn't drop her guard. Why should I believe you? She asked suspiciously. Why would I lie to you? Issei replied with his own question, albeit sounding a little exasperated by her mistrust. Ice-kun. Kiba interjected, sensing that things were about to get heated, gaining his friend's attention. For all we know, you could be a spy from another faction and you were sent to destroy us from the inside. He, calmly, explained. That's true. The brunette conceded the point with a nod of his head. However, I'm not. I told you guys that even today, I'm being followed by someone. Well, I know she's a fallen angel, I don't know her face. That, and Kuo is my hometown, the place I was born and raised in. He, strongly, told his friend. Kiba looked at Rias, wanting her to take the lead on this, once again. She, immediately, took the hint. Then, you won't object if I have Kaneko to be your shadow, in order to identify this fallen angel, and report her findings to me? Though she phrased this as a question, it wasn't really one. And Issei knew it. Of course, not. He, carelessly, shrugged his shoulders. He was, internally, relieved to see Rias lose some of her stiffness upon his agreement. Why did you hide yourself for a year, then? For that matter, why reveal your identity at this time and not earlier? Akeno brought up another subject altogether. Judging from her expression, Rias was curious as well. The same went for Kiba. According to Drake, I wasn't ready to confront anyone from the supernatural. The brunette, honestly, replied. In his head, he heard Zangetsu's mocking laugh about the half-truth he had just sprouted. He ignored it. Why, though? Kiba asked curiously. Contrary to what the devils expected, Issei turned absolutely serious. Honestly, I still think I'm not ready because, according to Drake, there will, probably, be some threats that will have to be removed in a permanent fashion. In layman's terms, I'll have to kill. Be it supernatural beings or humans with sacred gears, like myself, I don't think I'm ready to face such things. His confession caught them a little off guard, not expecting him to have such a problem. That said, it's natural. Ria's gained everyone's attention. She sported a soft, albeit understanding expression with a matching smile. Up until last year, you were just a normal teenager. You had no idea about the supernatural, but you had to get involved since you awakened the power of the Red Dragon Emperor. Speaking of whom, he was right, unfortunately, there will be a time for you to kill an opponent. She elaborated. I figured as much. Issei sighed in dejection, his shoulders sagging a little. That said, I, also, know that I need allies. I may be strong, but I'm not foolish enough to try and protect everything and everyone on my own. He, shamelessly, admitted. Even Superman needed allies to watch his back. And, even if he was stronger than Superman at the moment, he needed people he could trust, so his ultimate goal came to fruition. Starting with Kuo. Speaking of strong, Kiba interjected, again, with a curious expression. How powerful are you, Ice-kun? Before Issei could answer, someone else did it for him. He can take us all on and come out unscathed. Completely. All heads turned to Kaneko, who had been silent the entire time, wearing shocked expressions. The fact that she said it so nonchalantly, despite her monotone, was far more disturbing for Issei than anyone else. Riaz regained her composure quickly enough, turning her head to face the, still, shocked brunette. Is that true? Her skepticism matched her interest in that information. Issei paid no attention to the redeed, his eyes locked to Kaneko's golden ones. How do you know that? He asked in bewilderment. Riaz didn't like being ignored, but let it slide. This time. I can feel anyone's power from a certain distance close to me. Her monotoned answer made him even more stunned. This means she has known about me since that time I met them in the student council office. Issei came to a terrifying realization in an instant. Drake, how is this possible? He basically demanded. Instead of talking to him mentally, the dragon materialized himself in the form of the boosted gear on the brunette's left arm. Issei was so surprised at the development, as were the others, that he broke eye contact with Kaneko and looked at his materialized gauntlet. Drake's thoughtful hum sounded like a low growl. I had told you that this girl is a Nekomata of some kind, a partner. Yaokai of any kind can sense others through the power of Senjutsu, which I have no knowledge on how it works. Though, for this one to sense all of your power and not report it to her superior for over a year, she must have had you deemed as a non-threatening individual. He explained in a casual manner, his booming voice reverberating throughout the enclosed room. The dragon's words managed to, visibly, calm the brunette down. On the other hand, Riaz was, internally, furious at Kaneko. However, she needed to address the more important entity first, before she spoke her mind to her servant. Greetings, Red Dragon Emperor. I am Riaz Gremory, heiress to the house of Gremory in the underworld. I am honored to be in your presence. She, regally, albeit confidently, introduced herself to Drake. Greetings, young devil of Gremory. Drake was casual, but like Issei, he didn't address Riaz by her name. Unbeknownst to everyone, Riaz was hurt about that fact. She knew it wasn't the dragon's fault, but damn it, she wanted to be known as Riaz Gremory, not Riaz of the House of Gremory. Forcefully, Riaz pushed the negative feelings to the back of her mind. Is what my servant said about Ice true, Drake-sama? She, curiously, asked the best source for information concerning the person of her interest. Yes, my partner is absurdly powerful for a human in his age, supernatural or not. The dragon confirmed in both seriousness and pride, much to the devil's shock and Issei's embarrassment, with the latter sporting a faint pink dust on his cheeks. Drake, partner, please don't say any more. You'll scare my allies. Issei pleaded. As you say, partner. Drake huffed in compliance. Ria's mind caught up with the brunette's words and regained her composure. You, still, want us to be your allies, Ice? She asked him in surprise. The brunette blinked twice and locked gazes with the redeed. Well, yeah. Why else do you think I revealed myself to you guys? He confirmed, although sounding like he was talking to a particularly difficult 5-year-old child. Riaz pouted childishly, puffed up cheeks, and an adorable blush adorned her face. Issei's heart skipped a beat at the sight. Kiba chuckled awkwardly, albeit silently. Ara Butchu is being scolded despite her words, Akeno was, clearly, amused. Ria's blush intensified. Along with her pout. Mou stopped treating me like a child. She complained like a child, stomping her foot on the carpet as if that would help her argument. Drake found no interest in the current happenings, so he dematerialized himself. I wasn't trying to. Issei smiled with his hands up in surrender. Although, I have to admit, you look adorable like that. His smile widened at his own words. Rias huffed in indignation and turned her face away from everyone, trying to ignore Akeno's amused giggles and Issei's matching chuckles. As fun as this is, Kiba took control of the conversation, taking pity on Rias. We have a meeting to finish in order for us to perform our devil duties, he said, somewhat seriously. While not showing it to Kiba directly, Rias was thankful for her servant's intervention as she regained her composure. What duties? Issei asked curiously as he eyed his friend. Seeing an opportunity to avoid further embarrassment, Rias grabbed it with fervor. We, devils, try to make humans' wishes come true to the best of our ability. When it's completed, the human in question has to pay the devil accordingly. In the old days, however, the devils demanded the souls of humans. Something that may, still, happen should a human be in their dying breath and are saved by a devil. If that is to happen, the devil can reincarnate the human into devil as well, though as a servant for life. For example, Akeno, Kaneko and Udo are my servants due to different and personal circumstances. She, thoroughly, explained, sounding confident and regal the entire time. I see. Issei nodded in understanding, since Ria's explanation was simple enough. However, there was one question. How do you, devils, reincarnated humans as one of your own people? He asked in genuine curiosity. After all, it was something not even Drake knew about. Ria's smile widened at his apparent interest. For that to explain, I need to tell you about the history of devils as a whole. Issei looked uncomfortable at that. While he did like interesting expositions, something that Rias seemed to excel at, he didn't want to know the history of the Retides race. For now, at least. His parents would get worried. Is there any short version for that? He, almost, caved in at her adorable pout, but held strong. You can tell me the long version another time. He negotiated. Fine. Rias sighed in dejection that she wouldn't show off her knowledge. Akeno. At the Retides' call, Akeno just nodded and went behind the desk. Once there, she opened a drawer and collected something before handing it to her friend. Upon receiving it, Rias took a seat in between Kiba and Kaneko. Taking the hint, Issei adjusted his position to be opposite of Rias. What was on the coffee table between them was a chessboard. One side had all the white pieces, while the other had dark red ones, albeit missing some. More specifically, the brunette noticed the red set missed a queen, a bishop, a knight and a rook. Issei looked up at Rias, patiently waiting for her to explain. There is a system that allows a certain number of devils to reincarnate humans, as well as other species, as long as said species are weaker than the devil reincarnating them into one of our own, and it's based on chess. It's called the evil pieces system. The evil pieces have the same qualities as a chess piece, albeit altered to match our abilities as devils. Rias lectured. The brunette's curiosity matched his interest in the topic. However, time was of the essence. He didn't want to bear witness at one of his mother's tantrums. So, what are their abilities? He asked. Rias smiled confidently as she explained. Rooks have enhanced physical strength, giving them the ability to attack and defend more effectively. Knights gain enhanced speed, and, often, they specialize themselves in wielding some kind of weapon. Bishops have their magical abilities enhanced, and queens are the jack of all trades, possessing all three abilities. As for the pawns, while weak on the surface, they can be extremely dangerous, considering they have the ability of promotion to whatever piece their body can endure in enemy territory, or the kings allowing them to do so. Very interesting. Issei admitted as his eyes fell on the chessboard for a moment. Then, he raised his head and looked at everyone there in curiosity. So, who is which piece? He asked. That, Ice, Rias smiled playfully as she leaned back on the couch. Is a surprise for a time when we can show you, instead of just telling you. Fair enough. Issei accepted, easily, with a nonchalant shrug of his shoulders. I have to go, anyway. I don't want to worry my parents. He added, somewhat apologetically as he stood up. Rias and Kiba followed his example. Don't be a stranger now, Ice-kun. The blonde bid his goodbyes in his own way. The two boys shared a firm handshake at that. Nah, I'm pretty sure we'll socialize more from now on. Issei joked as he retracted his hand. That's true. Rias confirmed his assumption with a smiling nod. See you tomorrow, Ice. Goodbye, Ria-san, Akeno-san, Kaneko-san. The brunette nodded at each girl in farewell before he left. As he left the school premises, Issei felt Kaneko follow him in respectable distance. He was glad for that. And, as he walked towards his home, his mind replayed the entire meeting he had with the devils. All in all, while not exactly as he had planned, it went smoothly in his favor. Or, at least, that's how he felt about the matter. As he crossed a bridge for a shortcut, his eyes landed on a black-haired girl with a high school uniform he didn't recognize, although it had a red P as a distinctive feature on the chest area. The girl, also, seemed to be around his age, with violet eyes, slim, yet curvaceous figure, and her hair was long enough to reach her mid-back. His nose twitched and caught the familiar scent of his stalker on the girl. It seemed that he was so lost in thought that his stalker was able to maneuver however she wanted. Also, it seemed that she had decided to make her move, considering her eyes lit up as soon as she got sight of him. "Hello. Are you Haidu Issei-kun?" Issei, mentally, sighed. He didn't want to deal with her as well, but, it seemed, fate had other plans for him. "Yes, miss. And you are?" "Oh. I'm Amano Yuma. I've seen you around a lot and I like you. So, please get out with me." Issei was so stunned at the cutely stuttered yet bold declaration, complete with a bow to the waist, he said the first intelligent thing that came to his mind. Issei entered his house the same way he always did. Without making a sound. Thankfully, it seemed that his parents were in the living room and cuddled on the couch as they watched a movie. The brunette was, still, dumbfounded at what had transpired mere minutes ago, his expression matching his sentiment as he sat on his bed. After all, it was the first time a girl had asked him out on a date. Even worse, due to his fried brain at that moment, he had accepted. It was a good thing he had exchanged numbers with Kiba. A figurative light bulb appeared above his head as he took out his cell phone from his pocket. If anyone knew about dates, it should be his, more than popular with girls, friend. Issei took a calming breath as he pushed the dial button. "Ice-kun?" Kiba's curious voice came from the other end of the line. "Yeah, it's me." Issei hoped he sounded calm as he, silently, gulped in nervousness, while, also, making sure he was quiet as to not alert his parents of his return. "Sorry to call so soon after I left, but it's important." "What happened?" It was obvious that the blonde went from calm to high alert in an instant. The brunette gulped one more time before he answered. "The fallen angel stalking me came in contact with me on my way home," he explained. "Hold on a moment, Ice-kun. Kaneko-chan just returned and is reporting to Ria's butchu." Issei felt his nervousness rise exponentially at that. Through the phone, the brunette could, easily, hear Kaneko's soft, monotone voice, relaying the event of his meeting with his stalker to the redhead word for word. Hearing Kiba sigh at the other end of the line, once Kaneko finished her report, made Issei shrink to himself as if he'd been a 5-year-old and done something incredibly stupid. "Really, Ice-kun? You agreed to that date on Sunday?" Kiba asked in exasperation, with a little bit of mirth as well. Yeah, Issei couldn't hide his embarrassment at his admission. "In my defense, she caught me completely off guard." He meekly defended himself. A short silence ensued, in which the brunette's nervousness rose tremendously. "Ice-kun, Ria's butchu wants to talk to you, and she seems serious." Kiba informed him in an awkward tone. It only helped Issei's nervousness reach its peak. "Ice?" Ria's voice called out to him as if to ensure he was there. "I'm here, Ria-san." The brunette sighed in resignation to his fate. "Don't feel bad, Ice." Ria's tried to console him. "As stupid as it sounds, your date with the fallen angel is a good thing." The brunette sighed in relief to hear that. "How so?" he, curiously, asked. "Tomorrow, after school, I'll send Udo to fetch you to come to our club. I already have an idea on how to deal with your little stalker, as far as the date itself is concerned, at least. So, you can come here and we can talk about it," she told him conversationally. "Okay, Ria-san. I'll see you tomorrow, then." Issei's whole being relaxed as he terminated the call. Then, after having another relieved sigh, he went to his desk to do his homework. It was difficult to concentrate, but he managed to pull through. Looking at the time on his phone, he saw that he had around 2 hours before dinner. His eyes, then, landed on his laptop. Issei had been studying several things as to how he could be a perfect boyfriend material and an extremely versatile person in society once he would become an adult. However, since he lacked experience on dating, there was something to guide him, which wasn't generic advice. For once, Issei forwent his meditation and did an online research on dating. More specifically, failures and successes on first dates, from the boy's perspective. Even if his date with Yuma was a fake one, he would treat it as a normal date, based on her cute and shy personality. That said, he might have to make some adjustments, according to what Riaz would tell him the next day. After he had dinner with his parents, with his mother scolding him about being back too late and not even telling her, Issei had a shower and went straight to bed. He wasn't particularly excited to spar with his tenants, but he knew they would leave him no choice in the matter. The next day, Issei couldn't wait for his meeting with the devils. Between Zangetsu's and Drake's brutality and, apart from the devils and his parents, everybody else's fear of him, he wanted this day to end as soon as possible. Not that he showed it, of course. He didn't even pay attention to the girl's daydreams regarding Kiba and himself when the blonde came to fetch him. The two boys walked in silence, since Kiba was able to detect the brunette's foul mood. Issei may have been smiling all day, but he had his eyes closed as well. And, considering the brunette's demeanor at the exhibition match, the blonde found it easy to see the signs. Once they were at the Occult Research Club's room, even the girls noticed the difference between his current mood and the one he had the day before. Though, they opted to not comment on it. So instead, Riaz got straight to the point. Ice, we learned about the fallen angel's identity. At that, Issei opened his eyes and his expression turned serious as he faced the redeed. Even if he didn't show it, he was thankful for the distraction. And? He probed. Ikeno handed 2 photos to Riaz, who showed them to Issei. One of them showed the same girl he encountered the day before, running right after her meeting with him. The other, however, made him narrow his eyes in suspicion. The other photo was of a girl, almost, at the same height as him. Aside from that and the fact that she looked 5 years older, though, she was a spitting image of the other girl. That said, the leather straps that, barely, functioned as clothing and a pair of black, large and feathery wings out of her back, all but confirmed that she was a fallen angel. Her name is Rainer and not Yuma Amano. Ria's serious voice turned his attention back to her as she put the photos upside down on her desk in front of her. What else? Issei matched her seriousness. In his mind, he erased the plan he had made for the date on Sunday. He needed a completely new one. She is, probably, the strongest out of her group of 4, including herself. Although, that doesn't say much. Fallen angels with just a pair of wings are considered cannon fodder and easy to dispose of. Anyway, Rainer, also, has a small army of an unknown number of stray exorcists, and their base is the abandoned church. Their intentions are completely unknown to us, unfortunately. That said, they are certainly up to no good, considering the amount of people Rainer's group consists of. Riaz, thoroughly, explained as she leaned back on her chair and crossed her arms under her breasts. Issei mimicked her actions so as to get more comfortable as he nodded in understanding to her small monologue. So, what do I have to do on the date? He inquired. Riaz grimaced a little, something that Issei didn't like. Unfortunately, you have to treat it as a normal date between 2 teenagers in high school. Why? The brunette was genuinely confused. We don't want Rainer to get suspicious of any of us, especially you, Ice. We want her to see the date to the end and make her intentions about you clear. Should she try to kill you, I'm sure that you can stop her and capture her. Honestly, Issei didn't like Ria's plan, even if it was solid and foolproof. Particularly, he didn't like the fact that the redeed sounded sure of Rainer's possible attempt to kill him. There was a question, though. Why capture her? He, curiously, asked. Riaz took a moment to drink some of Ikeno's tea to hydrate her mouth and throat. Delicious as always. If it was up to me, I would have killed her without a second thought. Issei didn't bother to hide his grimace upon hearing that. Especially since Riaz was both casual and cold about it. However, I cannot do that unless I want to jumpstart a war between devils and fallen angels. Oh. He had forgotten about that simple fact. My question still stands, though. Why capture her? To his bewilderment, Riaz smiled mysteriously and playfully before she spoke confidently. The first day we met you at Sauna's office, you matched her word for word and even managed to outsmart her throughout the last year. So, I will give you some time to figure it out yourself. The brunette heard the challenge loud and clear, all right. His mind ran a mile a minute, going through the strategic knowledge he had accumulated throughout the years. Even if he didn't have experience in the supernatural world, he was pretty sure he could. His mind came to a grinding halt as his serious dark green eyes met Ria's knowing blue ones. You want to interrogate Rainer-san about her group and her intentions. Issei said in realization. Sauna was right to take an interest to you, Ice. So have I, for that matter. You are incredibly smart for a human of your age. Riaz praised him with all the honesty she could. Issei found himself smirking in satisfaction and pride that he figured out the redhead's plan in a matter of seconds. A short silence ensued, with Kiba and Ikeno looking appraisingly at the brunette. Kaneko was her usual self, munching on some cookies. Typical glutton. Okay. Issei broke the silence, gaining the attention of the room. Now that we have a solid plan, is there something else you need from me? He, conversationally, asked. Riaz put on a thoughtful expression as she thought about it for a moment. Then, a figurative bulb lit up above her head and her eyes widened a little at her own forgetfulness. Actually, there is. She, slowly, said. There is? Ikeno raised a delicate eyebrow to express her skepticism. Yes. The Redeed replied confidently, not even looking at her friend's direction. Instead, her gaze was locked with Issei. We haven't signed a contract for our alliance. Three simultaneous OS in realization was her response. Then, Issei became uncomfortable. I agree with you, Ria-san, but I don't want the rest of the devils to know about me just yet. That's fine and understandable. The Redeed nodded in agreement. So, we will make the contract match our desires in a way that nobody in the underworld will be suspicious. Not even the Mao. She added, sounding eager and confident. For the first time, Akeno became stern, almost knowing what her best friend planned, but didn't say anything. Kiba understood as well, but opted to remain silent, hoping his king's plan wouldn't backfire. Issei relaxed upon hearing that. Then, what about Sona and her own peerage? He asked curiously. Apparently, it was the wrong thing to do, because Ria's and her peerage seemed to be on high alert. Oops. The brunette smiled awkwardly as he raised his hands in surrender. Don't look at me like that, guys. I've known you're all devils since day one, due to Drake. We figured that out yesterday, Ice-kun. Kiba drew his attention with a serious tone. What we want to know is how you know Sona Kaichu's real name. He elaborated as calmly as he could. Oh. How stupid of him to let it slip out like that. And he doubted telling them about his extremely sensitive ears would persuade them. That said, Issei hated lying. Would you believe me that I have extremely sensitive ears and nose, as well as unbelievably good eyesight? He asked in a hopeful manner. Prove it. Kaneko challenged him immediately, her voice as emotionless as ever. Issei just nodded and closed his eyes to focus. The others, Kaneko in particular, watched him with bated breath. It didn't even take a minute for the brunette to find something worthwhile. He was lucky, though. Sona Kaichu and Tsubaki Fukakeichu just finished talking about recruiting a second-year guy named Genshiro Saji in Sona Kaichu's peerage. Apparently, Saji-san has a dragon-type sacred gear, although nowhere near as powerful as the boosted gear, her words not mine. Also, it seems his goal to be a teacher in the future aligns with Sona Kaichu's interests. An awkward silence ensued. Partly because Rias believed him, since she wasn't informed about that yet. After all, Sona and herself had agreed to talk about potential recruits. The second part was because they all felt uncomfortable for a specific reason. How much have you heard, Ice? Rias, basically, demanded. The brunette smiled awkwardly, again, as he spoke. Well, apart from Akeno-san, I knew your first names even before I met you at school, since I heard you talking on that hill, so I knew your plan as well, at the time. I also know about your meeting after I told you about the fallen angel following me. And for Rainer, it was thanks to my nose I knew she was around me. Nothing else. He explained in honesty. Understandably, the devils were shocked at the revelation, but didn't react otherwise. So, what about the contract? Issei asked quickly, hoping to change the subject. Fortunately for him, he was successful. Yes. Ria's mind was still a little blown by the latest revelation, but she decided to discuss this at a later time. For starters, I won't hide the truth from Sona, but I will keep your identity a secret to the rest of the devils, including the Mao, disguising you as a magician. She started the negotiation. Issei nodded in agreement to that. If it came down to it, he would pass his abilities as magic. Even Zangetsu. Since I don't have experience in this at all, I'll have to trust you for everything else as well. He, sheepishly, said as he rubbed the back of his head. Very well. Rias nodded and wrote down on a paper that had appeared out of nowhere in front of her. While she was writing, the rest waited for her, patiently, albeit with anticipation. It took her 5 minutes to finish, before, with a calm wave of her hand, the paper floated to Issei's hands for him to read. I have to help you with your devil contracts, the protection of Kuo and the devil race, along with any possible allies, and your raiding games until you complete your peerage. The brunette summarized what he read in a thoughtful tone, before raising his head to show his confusion. What are raiding games? Basically, Akeno drew his attention. They are battles between peerages. Raiding games are used, mostly, as some kind of entertainment for the devils, while, also, being used as a way to solve any kind of issue between houses. She explained in a lecturing tone. Issei seemed skeptical about that. Are there any deaths? He asked as calmly as he could to hide his apprehension. The raiding game system is programmed so that no one dies. There might be some accidents, but, so far, there hasn't been a reported death. Only serious injuries. Yet, even those can be healed with magic or other means, so you don't have to worry about that, Ice-kun. Biba was the one to explain, this time, in a reassuring tone. The brunette sighed in relief before his eyes fell to the paper, once again, in contemplation. After all, for his services, he would be paid handsomely, even if he performed a single contract a month. 60,000 yen per contract, and the fee got exponentially bigger for other events, like winning in a rating game. Plus, he would be allies with people he could call his friends in time. For now, only Kiba had that privilege. Last, but not least, however, he would be bound to the contract until either Rias had a full peerage or they, mutually, agreed to terminate it. All in all, it was a win-win for both sides. Issei smiled as he raised his head to meet Ria's expectant expression. "I agree to your terms, Ria-san," the brunette softly said. Ria's heart almost stopped beating at his announcement. She was so happy, she had to, forcibly, restrain herself to jump from her chair and hug him to death. She had done it. She found a way out of her personal problem, should it come down to a rating game. The deed hid her inner glee under a small smile of her own. The paper in Issei's hands glowed a soft crimson glow for a moment, catching his attention. Then, the same glow appeared on the back of his right hand before it took the shape of a crimson sigil. He guessed it was Ria's family emblem. The same emblem appeared on the paper's bottom, as if to show it sealed the deal between them. Once he raised his head, again, he saw Ria staring in satisfaction at her own right hand before she met his eyes. "Thank you, Ice. It was the first time I did something like this and, thanks to your compliance, it was successful." The Redeed spoke, emotionally, from her heart. The brunette didn't know why she spoke that way, but he liked how she sounded. "And I thank you, Ria-san, for becoming allies with me. All of you are good people and, like Kiba, I would like to call you as my friends in the future." He, also, spoke honestly with a hopeful smile. Ria's and Akeno's eyes widened in surprise for a moment before they, appreciatively, smiled at him and nodded in agreement to his words. Kiba stood up, a kind smile in place as he presented his right hand. "Welcome to the supernatural world, Ice-kun." Issei took it without hesitation as he stood up himself. "Thank you, Kiba. I hope we all get along well." This is the end of the video. If you enjoyed the story, then hit the like button and comment your favorite part, but for now see you all in the next video.